Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Slash Filmcast, the official podcast of SlashFilm.com. I'm David Chen, and with me are...
Devindra Hardwar.
And Jeff Kanata.
Devindra, can we do that one more time? Sometimes he just cuts off the beginning of what you say.
Really? Maybe it's just when I unmute.
Yeah. So let's just do that again. Welcome to the official... I'm David Chen, and with me are...
Devindra Hardwar.
And Jeff Kanata.
Welcome to the show, everyone. Today, what we're going to be doing is counting down our top 10 films of 2017. That's going to be the whole episode. This is an episode that often people who we've lost along the way, they come back and they say, hey, I don't listen to the show anymore for some reason, but I do still like listening to the top 10 of the year. So if you haven't been listening, welcome back. Subscribe to the feed. Take a poke around and see if there's anything you might like. But otherwise, hope you enjoy this.
It's been a good year.
Yeah, it's been a really great year.
It has been a good year.
Indeed.
We put out some good stuff, guys.
Indeed. Well, we have more to say about that, but you can find more episodes of this podcast at slashfilmcast.com. Email us at slashfilmcast@gmail.com. And before we get into our top 10 films, I wanted to just give a few shout-outs. First of all, I wanted to thank all the people that donated this past week to support the Slash Filmcast. We have Dougal Thompson donating at the rate of $2 per month to subscribe to this podcast. And also, Mike in Minneapolis, who gave a very generous donation and who wrote the following message along with that donation. Dave, Devindra, and Jeff, this is a long overdue donation. You've given me at least 5 years' worth of quality movie podcasts for free. Of course, Slash Filmcast has been running for like 9 or 10 years, but maybe this person just discovered us in the last 5 years, which is awesome. What a deal for me, Mike says. It's time I start to show my appreciation for your hard work and dedication to the Slash Film podcast. Whether it's Dave hating most things the rest of us enjoy, Devindra defending sci-fi that probably isn't that great, or Jeff loving everything and anything Marvel, I always listen. Again, I'm going to pause here for a second. Sounds like someone who sounds like what someone would say who doesn't like the show. But fair enough. Fair enough. I'm glad.
That's what we are, Dave. Our greatest strength is also our greatest weakness.
That's correct. Anyway, Mike continues here. I'm sure it's a familiar story you hear from other listeners, but it's worth sharing my listening story. I listen to each and every episode up until the spoilers. At that point, if I'm planning to watch the movie, I stop and save the podcast to re-listen to it after I've watched the movie. Listening to the podcast is truly my second favorite piece of movie-going experience aside from watching the actual movie. It's like listening to people I've gotten to know over the years have a conversation, something that sounds easy and natural to accomplish, but I'm sure has taken years and years of practice. Anyway, enough with the praises. Keep doing what you're doing, and know it's greatly appreciated. Well, thank you, Mike in Minneapolis, for that message and for the very generous donation. We really appreciate it. If you want to support what we do here on the podcast in 2018, go to paypal.me/filmcast. That's paypal.me/filmcast. And then enter an amount to donate. All the money you donate to us does help us go to defray the costs of seeing movies and putting on the show. So we really appreciate all the contributions we've had over the course of the last year. It's been awesome. Also, something we like to do before we get into our top 10 of the year is talk about the year as a whole in moviegoing, and the year as a whole in terms of the movies, the trends we've seen. And so there's a few stories I want to touch upon, and I think the biggest one is, of course, Harvey Weinstein. What happened with Harvey Weinstein, all the women coming forward to talk about their experiences with him, and then the aftermath of that, like that story then empowering more people to tell their stories. I think it was Farhad Manjoo or someone else on Twitter who said, like, this is possibly one of the single most socially consequential pieces of reporting that's been done in recent memory. And I think that's very accurate. I mean, that single story, first in the New York Times, then in the New Yorker, has just set a series of events in motion in our society as a whole that I think we're still in the middle of. And it would be ridiculous to talk about any year of movies without talking about how this one story has roiled the entire industry. And a lot of people have different opinions on how the industry should resolve it. You know, there's a leadership task force being formed, and other suggestions have also been in the mix. But wanted to just acknowledge that this is a thing that's happening, that the hashtag MeToo movement is here to stay, and I anticipate that we're going to see more of that in the year to come.
For sure.
Another thing that has happened this year is I think the movie industry is kind of in a state of crisis, guys. I think beyond, one of my favorite writers this year has been Richard Rushfield, who writes this newsletter called The Ankler. You guys had a chance to check this out yet? I would recommend it. It's a newsletter that you need to pay to subscribe to. It's like $40 a year or something like that. But it's definitely something that, in my opinion, is worth the money. Richard Rushfield's been working in the industry, been writing about the industry for a really long time. And he has dropped a lot of insights this year that have really stuck in my mind. And he did an interview with the Weekly Standard. And the title of the interview is "Hollywood is Dying and Not Even Star Wars Can Save It." And one of the questions from the interview is, from the outside, it looks like Hollywood is undergoing 4 or 5 simultaneous crises. There's the systemic sexual misconduct, there's the worst summer box office ever, there's the precarious position of the theatrical releases and the theater experience, and there's the rise of streaming and Silicon Valley's incursion into the entertainment business. It's like the industry version of Geostorm. Is it really as bad as all that? And that's the question. And Richard Rushfield's answer is, I'd say it is as bad as all that. For the reasons you described, which I'll go back to, the movie industry in particular has lost the plot. It's lost sight of the reasons why people go to the movies. It's been so focused on what movies can you market, which is generally shorthand for what movies will people show up for without you having to convince them that they actually should. In particular, Hollywood has lost sight of the way that people under 30, the ones who used to be the core audience, consume entertainment and what sort of experience they are looking for. End quote. So, I think there's a lot of insight in that whole interview. I'm going to read one more excerpt from it later, but it is a very dire time, I think. Overall, I think box office revenue is up, but number of tickets sold this year is stagnating or decreasing, which is definitely not where you want to be as an industry. And of course, guys, we all remember how crazy the summer box office was. So crazy that Devindra was somehow able to win #1 in the summer movie wager. I mean, that's how you know.
It all, Dave.
That's how you know how unpredictable it was, right? It was that Devindra could win.
But the whole issue here too, it's not just the studios, right? It is the theaters and them not catering to an experience that people would actually want and investing in things like 4DX and D-Box, which
if
are
we had more
like
D-Box theaters, we wouldn't be having this problem.
So those things go hand in hand, right? The content and the experience are both kind of figuring things out, and I think the theaters are getting better, but it's still a work in progress for everyone.
I had this big argument, not argument. Have you guys ever done this? You ever talk to your significant other about where to eat? And that conversation takes like 3 hours. Has that ever happened to you?
Sure. Yeah.
We had a conversation the other night where we spent like 90 minutes talking about where we would eat that night, and she kept bringing up like all these suggestions of these movie theaters around the area. Like there's this place called
dinner.
Yeah, to eat dinner. Like there's a Cinnabar in Montlake.
I'm really craving some terrible nachos and a hot dog.
Well, there's this place in the University District called, it used to be Sundance Cinemas, it's now called AMC 10. And I kept trying to figure out, like, what is she optimizing for? What is it she's trying to get out of this thing? She kept suggesting these theaters, and I said, okay, well, we could go to Montlake, but the only movie we could see is Jumanji. And she didn't want to see Jumanji, so then we kept like revising, and then finally she just exclaimed in frustration, I just want to see a movie and have a pizza brought to me. Like that was a very a pure and strong desire that she had. And
is there no Alamo there yet?
No, there's no Alamo here.
That would answer all of her questions.
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing is like there's very few places here where you can go see a good movie and get great food served to you. Like that's just not there yet. And So that's kind of my little piece to throw in the ring about experiences that I would like is
really
good.
That's not something I crave. I do not want people serving food during my movie experience.
Sure, but you can understand why a huge percentage of people might want that, though, right?
Yeah, I guess.
And it is a huge moneymaker, right? Because you're there and you're like, I want a beer. I'll spend $10 on this beer, which would cost me $4 anywhere else, you know. And that's the whole appeal of the Alamo Drafthouse. That's why that place is like, I assume they're doing really well, because
they
you go there and you're putting down a lot of money in the tickets, and a lot of money on everything. And it's not the sort of place where you can sneak in food too. I feel okay about sneaking in like a soda or something to normal theater. Alamo is like a restaurant. You can't bring in outside food.
I think maybe this article and our conversation doesn't emphasize enough how much entertainment there is that is excellent that doesn't require you going to the movies.
Yeah.
And you know, we
really kind of got on a side tangent there, Jeff, but yes.
Yeah, a little bit. We're in the golden age of television. In fact, I think the thing that brought adults to the movies in previous generations is now the thing that brings adults to Netflix and HBO and Amazon Prime streaming. Those kind of experiences are very few and far between on the big screen. And that, I think, is a much bigger factor than not being able to order pizza or I'm not to belittle what you said, but or these sort of ancillary experiential theater things, factors, I think play less of a role than the fact that the young people are watching their YouTubes and the older people are getting much richer, deeper narrative experiences at home on television. And Hollywood seems to be, the way they seem to be attacking that problem is just give you bigger and bigger spectacle. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I've already been framed this episode as the Marvel guy, so be it. I'm a Marvel zombie from way back, but I do look at the Marvelification of Hollywood as being a net negative. You know, I think Marvel doing that is great. I love how Marvel has done it, but everybody doesn't need to do it, and I think it is diminishing the product on the big screen overall.
Something that this interview went into that I thought was I've just been thinking about a lot since I read it was about what is the difference between movies and TV shows, right? And in the past, us on the podcast have tussled extensively, especially when I put the OJ documentary on my top 10 last year. There was much disparagement of that decision.
People are currently fighting about Twin Peaks: The Return.
I mean, that's just ridiculous. There's no way that should be a movie, guys.
Really?
I almost put Vietnam on my list just to spite you.
Yeah. I feel like the arguments for Twin Peaks is just as strong as the argument for the OJ show was. So,
well, how about to start with? I think to be a movie, it needs to have been shown in a movie theater at some point. But anyway. So something in this article that I thought was this interview that was fascinating was Richard says, quote, "For me, there's a line between movies and TV shows that matters even more to the future of movie studios than the direct financial questions. That's the sense of a new movie being an important cultural event in a way a new TV show premiere, with very few exceptions, is not. To boil this down, movies for me are about space. They are relatively condensed experiences, just a couple hours, but heightened when they are good by the intense craftsmanship that goes into every moment. That's why you can see your favorite films 100 times and still find something new. Why people watch them over and over again when they can recite the dialogue by heart. There's this heightened reality that makes film special and begs to be seen in the best possible circumstances. Television shows are about time, about building relationship with characters over the course of years. Game of Thrones didn't become a vital experience until the second or third season after we'd spent 15 or 20 hours with the characters. That's why in the great shows, the relationships with the characters grow over the years in a way they might not if you were going to the theaters to see The Godfather Part 27." End quote. So I think the you know, if I'm to reach for what is the difference between movies and TV, or what should be the difference, the idea of movies being these cultural touchstones, that feels very compelling to me. And I think one reason that movies are failing in a lot of ways is because they have lost sight of that. They've glommed onto other things, like how marketable a movie is, or how much money can it make, or how many toys can they sell from it, or how many universes.
Is any of that any new? Like, come on, we were hit there during the 90s in the comic book movies of the 90s. Like, you saw those Joel Schumacher Batman movies. What was going on there? I feel like it's everything we've seen
agreed.
Before,
it's not necessarily new, Devendra, but the difference is I think that every studio tried to have its own Batman this year, and not everyone succeeded. You know,
in a shared universe Batman.
Shared universe Batman, and so the box office this summer. I'm reading from a BuzzFeed report about this. For the first time in 35 years, domestic box office grosses for the summer, which traditionally run from Friday of May through Labor Day weekend, are down 18.5% from year to year. Grosses have not been this low since 2006. This isn't just bad. This is a history-making disaster, end quote. I mean, it was a rough summer for
the other
movies.
Difference between the 90s and now is that there was an independent film movement happening in the 90s that sort of was filling in that lower layer of cultural filmmaking and sort of cinematic filmmaking. And you're not really seeing that anymore. That doesn't happen. It's been squeezed out, I think.
Yeah.
And what's happening is those filmmakers who have those kinds of ideas are working in television.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. I mean, a really good example, I think, is Barry Jenkins, right? The guy who directed Moonlight.
Yeah.
I
Right.
think his next project is at Amazon, according to Variety. I just realized
I think
probably I
so.
shouldn't talk about that. But no,
Yeah.
I mean, like, that's a great example of
Yeah.
like a person whose next project, this guy achieved the highest echelon of movie making by winning an Oscar for Best Picture, and then decided, hey, the next thing I'm going to do is television. Like that's pretty damning. Implication of what the state. Okay.
He
anyway.
also directed an episode of Dear White People on Netflix.
Oh, yeah,
And I don't know if that was agreed before or after Moonlight, but that
Nice.
That's interesting.
Hold on.
Let
Let me just follow up with Jeff said. So
Sure.
so I can piece this together afterwards. Jeff, I completely agree. I think what we're seeing is a squeezing out of the middle. I mean, even just look at a company like Fox Searchlight, which used to dominate the indie scene. That domination is going away largely because a lot of those indie movies are going to the streaming companies like Netflix. And yeah, we're just seeing like the middle going away. We're seeing massive, big Hollywood blockbuster movies like Avengers: Infinity War, and then we're seeing tiny, tiny, tiny movies like Split or what's another Blumhouse movie I saw recently? Like all the Blumhouse movies.
Happy Death Day.
Happy Death Day. Like those movies that cost $5 million to make. And there's not that much. There's not that much in the middle, around the $40 to $50 million production budget range, which makes a movie like Baby Driver, which is made for about that much, kind of a miracle. You just rarely see movies that are made for mid-range budget that aren't based on anything. A, get made. B, get released. C, do well. And so it's just a challenging world out there. Devindra, what were you going to say?
I was going to say that newsletter did mention tech, the tech companies getting into this. And we talked a little bit about Amazon, but Netflix is getting into the movie world too. And who knows how their strategies are going to affect any of this too, right? Like I wrote a thing about Bright. Netflix greenlit a sequel to that movie, which cost around $100 million. Before it was even released, they probably had some data that would do really well. But that movie is not good. It checks off a lot of algorithmic check boxes, but it's not necessarily good. And I wonder if we're going to end up in the cycle where the algorithmic performance is better than the actual quality of the movie. Even though I think for a long while we thought Netflix and Amazon were some sort of savior for movies and focusing on quality and letting the artists do their thing. I don't know. I do not know the road we're going down now.
Well, it's an interesting thing where the metric is different, right? If you have a movie that opens, you look at how many people went to see that movie and how much money that brought into the studio. If you have a studio, Netflix is working effectively as a studio, $8 billion to the tune of $8 billion a year. And they just have a completely different metric. They don't care how many people. It's kind of like HBO and television, right? HBO doesn't care about your Nielsen rating. They care about the prestige level of having that programming on their station, so that people feel like HBO is essential. And that's Netflix idea as well. Is as long as we are essential, as long as you have to maintain your subscription, we don't care whether or not you watch the shows. If you just feel like you should be able to watch the shows,
or if you eventually watch the show, in 6
Yeah.
years from now, if you tune into Bright, then they'll their algorithm will say maybe, hey, it was worth making Bright.
But it's not even that. I think it's even farther than that. It's like, if you want to be able to be the kind of person that watches Bright, you know what I mean? If Bright is the kind of programming that makes you feel like, oh man, I better have Netflix because crazy interesting stuff is happening on Netflix, it doesn't matter if you watch it or not, as long as you feel like you should be subscribed to it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, according to Nielsen, Netflix famously doesn't release their numbers. According to Nielsen, 11 million people watched Bright on its opening weekend. So that is a lot. That's like if everyone paid paid for a ticket to see that movie, which I'm not saying they would have, but it would be around $100 million. So I'm guessing they will factor that in as a success. But as you said, Devindra, what does that say about what kinds of movies that will be made in the future and whether they'll be any good? I think is an open question. The only other thing I wanted to mention from this interview that I thought was really insightful was he said about how, like, this year we've seen tons of bombs. Quote, I would say in recent years you've had one great crowd-pleasing films that bombs and makes people say, gee, if people don't come out to see that, we're all in trouble. But this year, all the big bombs were ones you could see failing 1,000 miles away without the least question about why no one turned out for it. The paradigm is actually reversed this year. Traditionally, you've got one big, horrible, expensive disaster every year. The $300 million how did this happen train wreck that becomes a nexus for months of Schadenfreude. The John Carter of Mars or Howard the Duck slot. But this year, you had 4 of those. King Arthur, The Mummy, The Dark Tower, and now Geostorm. And a whole bunch of way underperformers such as Alien Covenant. Disney has led the way into this era of big IP, the idea that it's so expensive to make a movie that if you start out with a property that doesn't have a built-in universal name recognition, you're doomed. The problems are, 1, there's only so many universally beloved comic book heroes and sci-fi franchises to go around. 2, if you don't have your hands on any of those, you still have to make movies. And 3, as Hollywood is learning, a terrific name, even one with 1,500 years of built-in awareness like Arthur Pendragon, doesn't necessarily mean a good movie. End quote. So, this is the year we saw the continued implosion of movies that were based off of properties. Remember, there's a whole period of time where everyone's like, "Oh, hey, let's just make movies off things that are in the public domain that everyone knows about." Robin Hood, Arthur, King Arthur, all the Jungle Book, all this stuff, and of course, some of that.
There is another Robin Hood movie coming, by the way.
Yes, there is. Yeah. I love the idea of somebody sitting in a room and being like, "It's got 1,500 years of name recognition, guys."
All the undead will come out to see it.
Yeah, and just like that doesn't necessarily make it a good movie. It doesn't necessarily mean people want to see sequels. King Arthur, Legend of the Sword, that movie was set up as a movie that would spawn a bunch of sequels, right? I mean, if you not to give too much away about this movie no one's seen or will, but the end of that movie strongly implies that there's going to be more, and of course, never happened.
But I think that's the way. That's what all these studios want, is the thing that's going to spawn a bunch of sequels, and that's the only reason they spend the kind of crazy money it takes to make a big summer blockbuster is we're not just investing in one movie, we're investing in a whole suite of movies, and that is hard to do. It's hard to get that kind of mega hit that people want to keep coming back to over and over.
And on that note, I should say, looking over our top 10 lists, it's very few of the movies on our top 10 lists cost over $100 million to make, and B, are part of a franchise or are expected to spawn sequels. And I think there's something to that. Like, basically what I'm saying is most of those kinds of movies that came out this year weren't very good. And it's kind of been unfortunate to see in that way. All that said, I think this has been one of the best years for movies in terms of the quality of the films that we've ever seen. Right?
Certainly one of the hardest I can remember to make my list. I had a really hard time narrowing my list to 10.
Yeah.
And I don't remember it being that hard before.
Even as the industry is doing pretty badly overall, movie making as an art form, as a craft, is thriving. Largely because of this bifurcation. Like, most of the movies that did really well are really, or that we thought were really good, are very, very small movies. Movies made for a very small budget, under $10 million. That's where a lot of creativity can thrive. That's where artists are given more creative freedom. So it's been interesting to observe this year. So the year 2017 has been really crazy. A lot of changes in the trends, and just terrible things happening in both the industry and hold on, let me try and rephrase this. It's been, I think 2017 has really opened our eyes in terms of how bad things can get from both a business perspective, but also in terms of how powerful people treat non-powerful people. And I expect that we're going to continue seeing the consequences of that next year. All that said, let's move on from our conversation about the year and move on into our top 10 movies of 2017. Now, before we get to the top 10 of 2017, I want to also mention that after we discuss this, we're also going to talk about our honorable mentions. We're going to talk about our most disappointing films, and we're also going to talk about our most anticipated films of 2018. So stay tuned after the episode for that as well. But we have to start the conversation about our top 10 films of 2017 by giving a whole bunch of caveats, right? One is we didn't see every movie that came out in 2017.
Yes.
And not only that, we didn't even see most of the movies that came out in 2017. A lot of film critics do this as a job, full-time job, and they see, 150, 250 films in a year. And none of us do this as a full-time job, and so we haven't seen a lot of the movies that came out this year.
Real critics also get piles of screeners sometimes, which is very helpful for catching up in December.
Yeah.
So
anyway, wanted to just say if your movie isn't on this list or any of our lists, there's a high possibility we haven't seen it. Now, are there any regrets that you guys have about movies that you didn't have a chance to see before you made this list? Jeff Canada, what'd you think?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I didn't get a chance to see Call Me by Your Name, which I really wanted to. I think there's about a half a dozen movies that I had as potential, like, got to squeeze them in, and I just didn't get to them. Darkest Hour is on that list. I don't know. There's a few, I think, even on your guys' top 10s that I haven't gotten a chance to see yet, and it makes me sad.
Yeah, Darkest Hour is one I regret not having a chance to see. I didn't see any of our screenings from Phantom Thread, so didn't have a chance to check those out.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to see Phantom Thread till the new year. But those are really the only two that...
Oh, Mudbound is another one that I wanted to see.
Yeah. I didn't have a chance to watch as many documentaries as I would have liked. You guys know usually I pull for the documentaries in the top 10 lists. I don't think there's a single documentary on my list this year. And it's just because I didn't have a chance to see a lot of the documentaries. Didn't have a chance to see The Work, which I've heard is a brilliant documentary about prison group therapy. There's a documentary called Step about dancing that I've heard is really good. So
I have to tell you, Dave, not to spoil anything, but there's one movie I'm shocked was not on your top 10. And that is the Tickling documentary.
Oh, I believe it was on my top 10 for last year, Jeff.
Was it for last year?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought we talked about it this year. Sorry.
We did talk about it this year, but it was on my top 10 for last year. David Farrier's movie called Tickled is a great film.
Right.
So those are what I regret not seeing. Devindra, anything you want to mention that you didn't see before we get to our number 10?
Mainly I, Tonya, I think. Like, that's something I've heard so much about, and a lot of people were talking about it. But I've seen most of the major movies I think are going to be a big deal going into the Oscar season and everything.
All right, so those are the things we haven't seen. And the other thing we should mention is that, let me ask you guys. I usually ask you guys this at the beginning of each of these lists is, were there any organizing principles, any trends, any things you saw emerge after you made your top 10 list this year? You know, like we usually try to make a statement about like what this top 10 list represents.
It's a hard year. It was a hard year. I don't remember more movement in my list in any previous year. I have futzed with this list more this year than I can ever remember, and for me, the 10 movies were hard enough. There's a bunch of movies that I'll mention in my honorable mentions that probably could have made a top 10 easily and didn't. But even harder than that was the ordering of these movies. Like, I feel like I could jumble up my 10 in a different jumble and just be fairly satisfied with a different numbering. So as we've said, the overall quality this year has been really, really high. And there's been so many movies I've fallen in love with, which is, I think, a very great thing to say.
I was watching Movie Bob on YouTube give his top 10 movies of the year, and he just said he dropped a bunch of truths about his list that I just thought, hey, like that's kind of true about my list too. And he basically said, first of all, you might see me create a top 10 list for other places. Some places you might have published a list online. Critics societies often ask you to submit a top 10, and he was saying, oh, my top 10 list might be different depending on where you see it, because sometimes your list changes from one time when you make a list to another time when you're going to make a list. Other times, you might know that a society or a group is voting one way, and so you want to try and give more love to this other movie or a group of movies, because ultimately the goal of any list is to get people to try and see some of these movies, right? That was his philosophy, is that really the only reason we're making this is so hopefully it's not to be a masturbatory, hey, don't we all like the same things, but it's to say, hey, if you haven't seen this movie, you should go see it because it's really amazing and we think it's like one of the best films of the year.
I mean, it's a little bit that masturbatory one.
That masturbatory, yeah. And then he also said something that he said, basically the ordering of none of these matters except for number one, which I think is fairly true for us as well.
Yes.
Although I guess, Jeff, you're saying you agonized over the ordering of this.
I did. I had 3 different movies in my number one at any given time.
Wow.
So
okay.
I've had a really hard time with my list this year. So
I think in the past what I've said is that the ordering gets more accurate the higher up on the list. So probably like 3 to 1, I feel really good about that ordering, and then everything else I'm not as strong about. Yeah,
same. Yeah.
If I'm to think, the thing that I think of when I think of my top 10 list is like movies that tried to show us something new and different than what we would usually get at the movie theaters. And I think if you've been reviewing movies on a podcast for about 10 years, you tend to prize novelty more than I think a normal person would prize novelty. And so I do want to just say that is one of my biases, is I will always prize something that's novel and original and bold and that I can't see in any other movie this year than something that's already been done, even if it's executed really well. So
that's interesting. I don't think I have that same bias. I think my bias, and this probably will surprise 0 people who listen to the show regularly, my bias is movies that speak to me on a sort of human emotional level, movies that say something about the human experience that I find to be honest and true.
Right. And to be fair, that also is part of my logic as well. But I'm also saying like another part of my logic is that it's something bold and original, So, but I understand that. We're confessing to our biases before we get to the top 10s. So, Devindra, anything else you want to add about your list?
No, I mean, it's I feel like my number one, my 1 through 3 is pretty much an order that I think is set.
Yeah.
The rest of my top 10, honestly, my honorable mentions could be in there given, a different day of the week or something. So it's more like a top 20 for me this year. There's just so much good stuff.
All right. One final thing, which is that in the past, we usually just go like all of our top 10s, all of our number 9s, all of our number 8s. And last year, while we were recording this, Jeff called me out on air and said, hey, this is a bad way to do it, Dave. What we should do is if someone has, a movie at their number 10 that's also someone's number 1, we should just wait until the person's number 1 so that we don't need to, so that we can have the conversation all together at one time, and so no thunder is stolen, right?
At the movie's highest point, right?
At the movie's highest point on anyone's list. On anyone's list.
And for the first time ever, Dave listened to something I suggested.
That's correct. That's correct. So this year, if someone has a number 10 choice that appears later on the list, we're just going to hold and have the whole conversation together. Spoiler free, no spoilers, but we will try to have an in-depth conversation about that movie. So all that said, let's get to our top 10 films of 2017. Jeff Kanata, start us off with your number 10.
My number 10 is Mother with an exclamation point. We had
Mother.
This movie, I think, is incredible. It spoke to me on a very deep level. You can go back and listen to our episode about that if you want to hear me say exactly why, although that episode has become sadly problematic at this point because of a guest who has since embroiled himself in that Me Too controversy in the most appalling way. But I still stand behind all of the comments that I made about the movie in that episode. It is a sprawling, ambitious, weird film, but one that absolutely spoke to me. It made me understand my wife on a level that I hadn't before, which is a truly, I think, amazing thing to say about a piece of art, that it made me reanalyze the relationships in my life and look at the things that I do through my wife's eyes a little better. I think Mother is ambitious and crazy, but crazy in the best possible way.
You know, Jeff Kanata, Mother is also my number 10 choice.
Synergy!
This is a movie I have not been able to get out of my head since I saw it. And I actually watched all the special features for Mother recently over the break.
Are they good?
There is a 30-minute documentary on the making of the film, and it just even the small. I think hold on, I'm stumbling a little bit here. Sorry, guys. I think the production cost of Mother was around $30 million. Of course, it is not the most expensive movie. It all takes place in one location, although some crazy stuff does pop off at that location. But you really appreciate how much work and care goes into a movie even of this scale. They had a literal house that they built in the middle of like a meadow somewhere to be the house on location, and then they had to build a set for when some of the crazier stuff starts going on in the house. And there's like I don't want to say anything about what I saw in the making of, because I don't want to give anything away about the film. But suffice to say, the last half of the movie, there is just this kind of descent into madness, let's say, that is incredible to behold. And it's a really bold film because it is so seemingly personal to writer and director Darren Aronofsky, who was dating the main character, or the actress who plays the protagonist while he's making the movie. It's like very, very personal, and kind of like in a way that's uncomfortable, to be honest. You know, in a way that makes you feel like you're prying into someone's personal life. And that just takes a lot of boldness and chutzpah to kind of put yourself out there in that way. So for that alone, I think it's worth noting. But then how skillfully it's made, you know, we pointed out during our review that the entire film, like 99% of the film, is 3 shots. It's from her point of view perspective, like over the shoulder or a close-up of her face. That's the entire film. And it really does immerse you in that character's perspective in a way that's unique in movies, I think.
And it creates a tension because of it, I think, that I found to be thrilling. I throughout the whole movie, I was just on the edge of my seat because of how it was shot and how confining it felt, and just being inside her confusion. I felt confused and tense throughout. It's a remarkable just mystery in the first 2/3 as well.
It's a movie that also provoked a lot of different interpretations. You know, Jeff, you interpreted it as a commentary on like art. The one that resonates most with me is the metaphor of it being it's a metaphor for the creation story. You know, the Bible, like all the stuff that happens in Genesis. That's what I feel like happens in this movie. But people have all these different interpretations of what it means. I think it was Angie Han who said, "Hey, she talked to 5 people who were like, oh, well, the metaphor in the movie is obvious,' and then they each gave a different version of what it was." Right?
Yeah.
That it's a movie that spawned all this, like, people feeling really strong about it and feeling strong in really different ways about it. And
it's painted so broadly too, right? Like, I think that's the key to it. You can read so much into it because of the way he doesn't get too specific about the story or the story he's trying to tell until like after the movie came out, and then Aronofsky wouldn't shut up. So I'd say the best way to go into Mother is not to read anything Aronofsky said at all.
Even though literally at my screening there was a paper with stuff Aronofsky said to read before the movie.
Yeah.
I do just want to point out one last thing, which is I think the craft, the filmmaking in the last half of Mother is exceptional. I mean, I think
throughout,
throughout, but just so much stuff happens in the last half that, like, I can understand why that would be the point people would jump off board the movie, because if you conceive of the movie as like a realistic, you know, down to earth retelling of a story, you know, even in the form of metaphor, then the last half of the movie kind of does away with a lot of that. Like it's hard to take the movie literally. It's hard to take a movie literally, basically, because of what happens in the last half of the movie. And I understand why people don't like a movie that you can't take literally, because most movies you can take literally. Most movies, what's happening on screen is what's actually happening, in the reality of the film. And this is a movie that you can't really do that for. But the way it's made and shot and executed, and the way background artists are deployed, it's just a marvel of a film that I just haven't been able to stop thinking about. Like this, that last half of the movie, I just can't get it out of my mind. And it's not necessarily a movie I'd recommend to people in general, but it's still a movie that I just like, okay, yeah, like at the end of the year, there's all these movies I'm still thinking about, and that's one of them. So Mother by Darren Aronofsky, it's out on video on demand and Blu-ray, I think. And it's Jeff and my number 10.
And I just want to say, I think it is the sort of movie that will, when you watch it, could change the way you watch movies and the way you think about movies. And that's what's powerful about it. Because literally, if you're reading any form of art, literal interpretations are not usually the best way to do it. There's so much more going on that you can bring into it. And this is a movie that really proves that. And I'm sad I couldn't even fit it into my list this year. So,
one last thing, guys. I'm going to say that I think this is probably the best Jennifer Lawrence performance I've seen. I think she is great in this movie in a way that I think is very unacknowledged right now. I don't hear a lot of talk about her being in the best actress race, but I don't know, man. I think between Silver Linings Playbook and the Hunger Games and the X-Men movies, like this is the best that she has been. And I think it's kind of a bummer that that's not being, like she's not more in the mix for this movie.
Interesting.
So,
yeah.
Anyway, that's our number 10, Mother. Devindra, your number 10 it appears later on someone else's list. So we are going to wait to discuss it.
And I can't even announce it.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
I can't even announce it.
Yeah, that's right.
There.
That's right. And also, all of our number 9s, Jeff's number 9, Devindra's number 9, my number 9, we are all appear later on someone else's list. So they're all different movies.
System you got there, Jeff. Yeah.
they're all different movies, but they all appear later on someone else's list. So let's get to our number 8. Devindra Hardawar, what's your number 8 movie of 2017?
My number 8 is Logan, James Mangold's second Wolverine movie. I think this movie is just fantastic. It reinvents how you tell a superhero movie. It is very much a Western, like so many of Mangold's films. And, I think brings these characters to a point where we've never seen them before and kind of finalizes some of these stories between a lot of characters we've seen on screen and the actors portraying them. I think it does a lot of cool things. At the same time, it's also a kick-ass action movie and one with such an emotional core that I cannot watch this movie without being a bawling mess by the end. I think the final frame or the final shot of this movie is probably the thing that made me cry the most.
Oh wow!
In the theater this year, because it is so haunting. It's so beautiful, and for if you're like me and the X-Men mean a lot to you, I think it'll really hit you hard. So yeah, I love Logan.
All right, number 8 for me was also Logan.
Synergy.
Synergy.
I love this movie. I remember hearing James Mangold talk about it on Jeff Goldsmith's Q&A podcast. Which is, this movie and the press tour around it has basically been an excuse for James Mangold to weigh in against modern superhero filmmoving. He's just gone off on it and said it's terrible. Something he said was like the Avengers. There's 10 characters. The movie is 120 minutes long. So that means like each character gets 12 minutes of character development. That's assuming no action scenes. Right, so then if you cut that in half for action scenes, each character gets like 5. Like he'll do the math and say, basically, modern superhero movies suck. That's kind of his whole mentality.
I think he still feels a little resentful after the Wolverine, the last Wolverine movie he made, which I think got really messy towards the end. Even though I love that movie too, just not as much as this.
It's always good when someone explains why art sucks using math.
Yes.
I mean, he kind of talks about how, a lot of modern day superhero films are cramming in all these characters, and there's no time for any character development or character moments, and they're often trailers for future movies, or they often serve as trailers for future movies. And he just was not interested in any of that. So he had a lot of preconditions for when he made Logan, including that it had to be rated R, and it had to be they had to close out what happened to this character, and there had to be no possibility of future renditions for this character, or at least in this form. So it's his anti-modern superhero film, and I think it achieves it wonderfully. Love the performance that Hugh Jackman puts into this movie, and love what it does with the character, how it imagines the character, and love the relationship between him and Laura, played by Daphne Keane, who also does a phenomenal job in this film as kind of an action star. Very convincingly plays that. So really just a brilliant entry into the franchise. And hearing James Mangold talk about the R rating, something he said was, the MPAA, the people who give the ratings, it's kind of the way they assess things is kind of like pornography when it comes to violence. Is the question for them is there any penetration, right? So showing someone getting stabbed is fine as long as you don't show the knife going into the body, right? So knife going into their body, that's rated R. You showing them get stabbed, but you don't see the knife pop out of the back of their body, it's fine. PG-13.
Kind of hard for
that is a problem for a character who has knives growing out of his hands, right? And so it was.
So what you're saying is, if there was a character with penises growing out of his hands, it would be hard not to have.
It would be very challenging to not have an R rating. That's correct. But yeah, I mean, this is the first time I think we've seen Wolverine do realistic damage to people. I've seen the movie The Wolverine director's cut, which kind of had more blood, but in this movie we see him cut off limbs and stuff. It feels like the first true representation of this character that we've seen.
I kind of love that. Was if Mangold had tweeted some of the first pages of the script for this thing, and even the script was this is not your normal superhero movie. Limbs will be chopped off, blood will be everywhere. And that's not to say every superhero movie has to be like this, but I think his specific vision of this character, all his movies have always been focused on the characters, right? Copland, 3:10 to Yuma. This guy, he's been kind of a quiet powerhouse of a director who's never really gotten as much attention as I think he deserved. And Logan is kind of his chance to shine a little, so I'm glad he got this.
Yeah, Logan also did really, really well. It made $600 million worldwide, and the budget wasn't as high. I think it was around 110, 120, the budget, which compared to an Avengers movie or an X-Men movie would be more like 175 or 200. So it wasn't made for as much money as a conventional blockbuster. It made a ton of money, and so it's kind of one of the few stories this year that I feel good about. That this movie took a superhero franchise in bold new directions, wasn't made for that much money, and it made a great return for all the people that invested in it. So yeah, awesome story all around. That's Devindra and my number 8 movie of 2017, Logan. Jeff, your number 8 is mentioned elsewhere on someone else's list, as is your number 7, right?
Indeed.
So let's get to Devindra and my number 7. So it sounds like we have a lot of the same movies. I swear we did not plan this, but Devindra, you and I had the same movie for number 7 as well.
Synergy!
Super synergy. This is why we have a podcast that's going on for nearly 10 years, right? So,
Devindra, what's your number 7?
My number 7 is Lady Bird.
Hey guys, that was my number 9.
Nice.
So now we can have this conversation.
Now let's have this conversation. So Jeff, why don't you start us off? Because theoretically you had it earlier on your list.
Well, no, I think you guys rated it higher on your list, so you guys should talk about it. I just want to say that I also put Lady Bird on my list. That was my number 9, and you guys put it at number 7. So go ahead and tell me why Lady Bird is your number 7.
Yeah. I mean, it's a coming-of-age story, and we've seen so many of these, but I think Greta Gerwig, who wrote and directed this movie, there is such a specific voice here, such an original voice. I love everything about this film. I love Saoirse Ronan's performance. I love how I love Laurie Metcalf in this movie. It feels like a true-to-life representation of just growing up as a teenager and the struggles with that, and having well-meaning parents that you don't always agree with, but at the end of the day, they love you and, want to help you. I don't know. This movie just works on many levels for me, and I feel like it's one of the truest movies I've seen this year.
Yeah, I really love this movie as well. I think the thing that I love most about it is the relationship between Lady Bird and her mom, played by Laurie Metcalf, which, in my opinion, Laurie Metcalf, I mean, they're both great, but I think Laurie Metcalf is one of my favorite performances of the year because she really gets at what it's like to be a mom with a child that doesn't quite jive with you. A friend of mine once posted this Instagram photo of their children, and it was like on one of their birthdays, and this friend, who may or may not be listening to this podcast, said, like, I love my children, but I'm also glad I like them. And I had never really thought, because when you're growing up, your parents love you, hopefully, and you never really think of your parents liking you as a separate thing. At least I didn't. And when I read that, this was many months ago, I thought, yeah, like, I guess sometimes parents can love their kids but not like them. And this is a performance of a mom who loves her child but does not like her. And I just thought that was very profound in how it captured that dynamic of wanting the best for someone but just not really getting along with them. And
I think it's even there's even a little tweak that I would put on that. It's not even not liking them; it's wishing they were different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it's I love my kid, but I want them to be different.
Yeah,
and than they are. And I think that's a little subtler difference than just not liking them. It's not liking who they are. It's wanting them to be a different thing. And for a lot of parents, I know I have a lot of friends whose parents wish they were different than they are and are constantly trying to fix them and manipulate them into being something different than they are. And that's a tough thing for a parent because all of those things that are mixed up in wanting the best for your kid and loving your kid and thinking your experience can help them understand what's best for them gets in the way of their own life. And there are not enough movies that deal with that because I think it's a very common human experience. It's a beautiful thing. Yeah.
But there is that. And also Lady Bird herself, though, is dealing with a lot of issues and is honestly kind of an asshole during this movie, too. Like, it does get to that thing of teenagers working so hard to rebel that they push away the people who are trying to help them. And I never got the sense that Lady Bird's mom didn't want her to be who she was. It was more like she wanted her to be happier in her skin. And that's a tough thing to reconcile.
I think you're right, Devindra. I think that's a good point. And I think that ultimately the journey of Lady Bird in the movie is coming to realize that her mother was right about some stuff,
Mm-hmm. And that's everyone's journey. It's pretty much every child's journey. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one thing this movie also captures that I really appreciated is, I don't know about you guys, but the Chen household, we were shouters. Were you guys shouters? Did you guys ever shout in the household?
Not really.
Italian family, yes, very much so.
Yeah, and there's this just weird dynamic where if you're in a family together, you're basically stuck with these people for many, decades, right? And there's this dynamic that this movie captures that you can be literally screaming at someone, right, for a good 5 minutes, and then like 3 minutes later you're like, okay, you want to let's go to the store, we're gonna go back to our normal way of talking. And that's just a very odd dynamic in families that I don't feel is captured very often in movies. That this movie I think captures really effectively. So
going from an argument to genuine connection too.
Right.
Like there are several moments where it's not just going to the store, but also hey, look at this thing, and oh man, this is so beautiful, and we both like this thing together, and we have this connection. It's going from disconnect to connect on the the drop of a hat, which I think is fantastic. Yeah.
Jeff Kanata, any other thoughts? Any reason why this wasn't higher up, Jeff Kanata?
Well, there's just too many movies that I think I loved slightly more. But like I said, it was hard to put the exact order this year. I just think for me, Lady Bird is beautiful and certainly worth everybody's time. It is a movie that definitely earned its spot on my list. I just struggled with putting it above some of the movies that had a bigger impact on me. But I loved it. I think the performances are amazing, and it's a movie that I think will stand the test of time. I suspect this will be one of those cult films that's going to connect to a lot of teenagers, and funnily enough, I was connecting with the dad in this movie. Like I'm in that position now as a new father, where now I'm starting to relate to the parents, and I think it's to the movie's credit that it resonates from both directions, right? It's clearly written by someone who is telling her story from Lady Bird's perspective, but she does such a good job of writing all the characters that you can relate to her antagonists, quote unquote, just as strongly.
I think you were saying how it'll be discovered as a cult classic or whatever. This is actually a successful movie at the box office. Like, it is not
more successful than any of.
It is the most successful A24 film ever released. So
yes.
it made $31 million so far. I mean, it's doing very well. Like, for a movie of this scale, I think that is a smashing success that has already become part of our culture. So I would say it's not going to be a cult classic, Jeff, because it is already a mainstream classic.
Fair enough.
But
I just think it's gonna have that cult following.
Agreed.
I think there's gonna be one of those movies that like older sisters recommend to their younger sisters, or it's gonna be, I think, word of mouth kind of popularity also.
We should point out that A24 has had probably one of the best years of any distributor ever. I mean, let me read you a list of movies that A24 came out with this year. The Black Coat's Daughter, Free Fire, The Lovers, It Comes at Night, A Ghost Story, Good Time, The Florida Project, Killing of a Sacred Deer, Lady Bird, The Disaster Artist, The Ballad of Lefty Brown. Just many, many movies that not necessarily were all hits, but that were all really
high quality.
Yeah, high quality, critically acclaimed in some way. So they had a great year, I think.
Quite a list, for sure.
Okay. So, and Lady Bird being their most successful one this year, and of all time.
I was just thinking, I just watched The Disaster Artist the other night, and when you were talking about the special features on Mother and how they built the house and then had to build it again as a set, I was reminded of that scene in Disaster Artist where they're about to shoot on the alley set, and he's like, it looks exactly like the alley that's literally right outside. He's like, yes, but this big Hollywood movie, you have big Hollywood movie set. I thought that was funny.
All right, so Lady Bird was Devindra and my number 7. Now, for number 6, Devindra and I have choices that also appear later on the list. So, Jeff Kanata, why don't you take us through your number 6?
It's the Meyerowitz Stories, which was a Netflix original film, and I absolutely adore it.
I believe it's called the Meyerowitz Stories New and Selected, is it not?
Indeed, yes, parentheses, New and Selected. This, I think, again, a movie that resonated with me, that I felt was beautiful and subtle and presented a side of familial relations that you don't see I mean, I guess you kind of see it. It is familiar territory in the sense of artists, father, and kids that can't live up. But I think it has some new and interesting things to say. I thought Dustin Hoffman's performance was amazing. Ben Stiller is in this. Adam Sandler is in this. All delivering, I think, great performances. I loved this movie. I really did. I'm sad that neither of you guys put it on your list at all.
I really enjoyed it. Yeah, it just didn't crack it for me to top 10.
Just haven't had a chance to see it myself. So.
Oh yeah, I didn't know that. I think you'll like it, Dave. It is. I think it's a great use of language, and that's something that always, I think, clicks for me. I love it when a movie uses language, and I loved that relationship. And again, kind of like we talked with Lady Bird, it is in this case, the parental antagonist is self-obsessed and narcissistic, and sort of that is his central problem. But it is, again, that kind of love you but don't like you, or have a problem expressing my like because I want you to be different, and I think I know better than you do about your life. And it is family that loves each other very deeply but can't seem to get on the same wavelength of that love. That love keeps missing. It keeps it's how they have problems expressing it. They have problems syncing up and giving each other the things that they need out of that relationship. And I thought it was a really beautiful story, and funny and fun too.
All right, that's Jeff's number 6. It's the Meyerowitz Stories. It's on Netflix right now. Gentlemen, let's get to our number 5s. We can finally start talking about our choices now. So number 5, Devindra, you chose for your number 5 a movie that Jeff chose for his number 8, and I chose for my number 6.
Okay.
So, Devindra, what was your number 5 movie of 2017?
The Big Sick. Yeah, and
So great.
I love this movie, and honestly, mostly because the script I think is fantastic, written by Kumail Nanjiani and his wife Emily Gordon, and retelling their story. I think this is a great movie about comedy. It's a great movie about relationships, but also about, like, trying to exist in America. It's a story about an immigrant family and being an Indian or a Pakistani American guy trying to date and trying to have a relationship in America too. Like, this movie goes through so many things, and I think it covers a lot of different experiences that we don't typically see represented. And I want to say too, like, it's I think pretty sharply directed. It's not a showy film, but Michael Showalter, who directed it, I think did a solid job of bringing this thing to life. So I love this movie for sure.
Yeah, I also really appreciated this. Like you said, Devindra, my big reason for putting it as my number 6 was I think it tells this story of an immigrant and how challenging it is to be an immigrant in America for cultural reasons. And there's this baffling dynamic that happens where your parents, my parents certainly who came here, they immigrated to the U.S. They came to the U.S. because they wanted us to have a better life, like our family to have a better life with more choices for education and so on. But they also didn't want us to absorb the ways of America too much, right? You can't break from the ways of your people too much. And so it's like, well, who determines how that is balanced? Like, who like what are the arbitrary things that you're saying, like, we should ignore from our past and take from this future place that we're going to be in, and I like that the movie really captures that dynamic in a very funny and beautiful way,
For sure.
along with this kind of crazy story of modern love as well. Like, there's a lot of topics that this movie tackles that I think it does in a very sharp way. Modern love is one, and how that takes place in our society. And also, like, immigrants trying to thrive in our society. So for these reasons, that's why it was my number 6. Jeff Kanata, you put this as your number 8.
8.
So
yes, I
thoughts.
love it. Love it, love it, love it. Like you said, it's funny and fun. The love story is playful and so genuine and sweet. I really love, as much as I appreciate the things that you guys have been saying about the movie too, I really love the way it handles this notion that you don't just date someone, you date their entire family. And a lot of movies, most movies that even touch on this, handle it in a sort of Meet the Fockers way of just like pure comedic wackiness of, well, their parents are so crazy, it's hard to do. But here's a movie where it's really 2 love stories back to back, right? It's a love story of boy meets girl, and then a love story of boy meets girl's family and falls in love with them. And I thought that was so wonderful and unique and different. And that second love story is just as beautiful and just as sweet. And you don't ever see that. And I think, from my perspective, as somebody who married someone whose family I really like and love as well, I resonated, that level of the movie resonated. And it's a sweet film. It's really beautiful. And I think it's very much deserving of being a Best Picture nominee and on all of our lists.
Yeah, and that whole second section, by the way, powered by great performances from Holly Hunter and Ray Romano.
Definitely.
Ray Romano, who I always love in dramatic stuff. Like, he was great in Parenthood. Like, he's had a great run after Everybody Loves
Men of a
Raymond.
Certain Age.
Yeah, Men of a Certain Age. I haven't seen that show as much, but this movie uses him to great effect. His sort of like sad sack lovableness. At the same time, you can't help but want him to be happy in a way. Yeah.
Well, that's Devindra's number 5, my number 6, Jeff's number 8, The Big Sick. Let's move to Jeff's number 5 movie of 2017. Jeff Kanata?
It's Molly's Game. We just talked about this last week, I believe. It is Aaron Sorkin's directorial debut, based on a script he wrote. Jessica Chastain is phenomenal in it. As I said last week, I just really dig poker movies. I really do. And I dig Aaron Sorkin dialogue. I am a sucker for it. I don't think I've ever seen anything he's written that I didn't like. He brings it here. It's fun. It moves quickly. It delivers all of that fun Sorkin stuff of smart people bantering, smart people, engaging in a fencing match of words, which I could eat up. I could watch that all day long. If I could have Aaron Sorkin write everything, including reality, I would be the happiest guy ever. And Molly's Game delivers. It's fun. The poker stuff is fun. Where you go in the movie is fun. I think her relationship and the things we find out about her are powerful and resonated with me as well. Molly's Game is great, and it was, I think, very hard for me to put it as low as 5, but that's where it sits on my list.
I struggled mightily with whether to put Molly's Game on my top 10. Because I think in terms of pure enjoyment of a movie, it is probably in my top 10 of movies. Like, in terms of how much I just loved the experience of watching this movie. Yeah. It is just so entertaining. And I'd recommend it to anyone, basically. Poker or not, I mean, you should know the basic rules of Texas Hold'em, I think. Otherwise, some stuff will be hard to follow. But it is...
you get the idea.
Yeah.
Even without knowing.
It's just so much fun to watch. This movie is so much fun. And Jessica Chastain puts in an amazing performance in this movie. Aaron Sorkin... at the top of his game, not just as a writer. This is his directorial debut. He's like making really interesting decisions as a director. From a craft perspective, I really like it. But I just couldn't put it on my top. I couldn't get over that hump, Jeff. I think because I felt ultimately the story just felt a little bit too slight for me to put it on my top 10. But that doesn't take away from it, like how much absolute fun it was to watch, and the fact that I recommend it to anyone. So Molly's Game, great choice for number 5. That's for Jeff Kanata. My number 5 movie of 2017 was Dunkirk. Let me take a quick poll from you guys.
It was Devindra's number 10, by the way.
Yes, Devindra's number 10. Let me take a quick poll from you guys. Which movies did you guys see more than once in theaters this year? Because for me,
Star Wars.
Yeah.
Star Wars Last Jedi, Baby Driver, and Dunkirk. I think those were mine.
Dunkirk. And Logan, I saw a couple times, yeah.
Yeah. So Dunkirk is one of them because it's one of the movies where seeing it in a theater definitely adds to the experience in a variety of ways. I mean,
it honestly might be the only the only way to watch this movie, right? Because doing
agree.
it at home, even in a home theater setup, you're not going to get the same thing.
You literally aren't getting the same thing because
a
lot of the picture that was shot in IMAX is not available at home.
I just had an experience where my wife's somebody from my wife's family texted her asking if they should watch Dunkirk. It was on, I don't know, some streaming thing, and I was like, I kind of don't think I can even recommend that.
Yeah,
like, you should only watch it in the biggest format possible. And I also saw, I'm a big fan of the Pod Save America guys, and I think it was Dan Pfeiffer or somebody from Pod Save America tweeted that, like, probably not the best way to watch it, but I just watched Dunkirk on the back of a seat on an airplane. It was pretty good. And I was like, it physically hurts me to hear that.
I don't want to sound elitist or anything, and saying this sounds definitively elitist. It's just like, I think I wouldn't have even put Dunkirk on my list, but a couple of weeks ago, I saw it again in IMAX here in New York. Like the last week it was running. It was actually a couple days after the Blu-ray release. It was actually already out.
And that swung your decision. That swung the top 10.
That swung me because this movie, it is so big. Like, that's the thing. Like, it is a big grand vision. It's essentially, even though so much of it's about sound, I think it's constructed like a silent film, wherein like the dialogue and everything doesn't matter as much. It's more about the imagery and how it's all connected and the editing, and getting that experience. Even seeing it in a normal theater, I think would be great. At home, unless you have a huge screen, or you have a home projection setup and surround sound and everything, you're not going to get like what this movie is really trying to do. That's the tough thing, because it's not really about the dialogue. It's more about this pure cinematic experience. It's VR without VR headsets in a way.
So Dunkirk is my number 5 just because, it is an unparalleled cinematic experience that somehow manages to be extremely terrifying and heartbreaking while still maintaining a PG-13 rating in a war film. And there are sequences of this movie that have rarely been attempted in the past, and that are clearly inspired by other war films, of eras past that are just really a wonder to behold. And everything comes together, the acting, the cinematography, Hans Zimmer's score, to create what is a very foreboding and scary experience of being like part of this group of men trapped in this location with like the world closing in on you.
This movie is all sound and fury.
Yeah.
And that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, you just don't want to complete the rest of that quote.
But not. But I mean, I don't think it does mean nothing. I think there is a real. There's value in like trying to give us a piece of this history through modern day cinema. So I was a big fan of it. Is my number 5 is your number 10, Devindra. Jeff's not on your list at all, right?
That's right, and I don't disagree with 90% of what you guys have said. It is truly a marvel to look at, a marvel to hear. It is an experience in the theater. I saw it in 70 millimeter IMAX. It was not like anything else, and that I think certainly gives it import, and you can't take anything away from that. For me, the reason it didn't make my list and never challenged my list is I just felt like fundamentally it wasn't much. There wasn't much there. Like it was a moment in time. It just didn't add up too much. It felt like a sequence from a bigger movie that somehow was its own movie. Yeah. And that's okay. Like I understand what he was going for, and you certainly are inside that moment, but it didn't feel substantial enough as a film, as a sentence. Do you know what I mean? Like it wasn't a complete sentence to me.
Let me try and sway you. Someone in the chat room, Stephen Rivers, says Stephen Tobolowsky had some great tweets about Dunkirk, a great summarization, which I had not actually seen, but reading it now, it's quite compelling. He says here, Dunkirk is a story. He says here, Dunkirk. I will never forget this film. It burned a hole through me. Christopher Nolan masterwork. I've heard criticisms that if you didn't know what happened at Dunkirk, you still wouldn't know. True, but this film isn't about Dunkirk. Dunkirk is only a backdrop. In Dunkirk, time ceases to exist as it does in most films where the viewer is safely watching a story unfold. What unfolds here is ordered chaos and sudden death, but what emerges is a miracle. Honor, nobility, heroism, but no fanfare, only survival. Dunkirk is a story told through the fog of war. As a viewer, you are immediately thrown into a state of confusion. You move through the overlapping narratives, and day becomes night and day. Or was it night? You were underwater, in the air, nowhere. So this are a few tweets from Stephen Tobolowsky about Dunkirk. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't even conflict with what you said, Jeff. You know, it's just like what this movie does is so effective at kind of immersing you into this environment. That just like on a pure craft level alone, it is remarkable and deserving of recognition.
I don't disagree with that. I don't disagree with that.
Yeah. It sort of feels like cinematic beat poetry, right? Like boom, bang,
like
crash,
it's like right into a situation, but like no context, right? No broader implications, like no context, just like this is a singular experience. You have it, and then you leave, and hopefully you think about it afterwards. But yeah,
and this sort of,
go ahead, Devindra.
It sort of feels like something Nolan's been building up throughout his career, right? Like I remember when we were talking about The Dark Knight, and people would argue about the editing of that movie and how he would connect certain sequences, or how, oh man, wasn't Bruce Wayne just like in Gotham and now he's in China? He's in Hong Kong, and what's happening here? And it's the way Nolan has been trying to tell his stories. Inception has a lot of this too, of just like he is compressing time and experience in a way that I think in a way only cinema can. You know, he is one of the purest filmmakers right now, and this movie just really shows it. It's definitely an untraditional narrative, and I don't even know. Like, I kind of want to buy this on 4K Blu-ray just as like a sound demo, But I don't know if I'd be able to like really take in the entire movie that way.
This is my favorite of the movies that Christopher Nolan has made in the last 5 years. Interstellar and Dark Knight Rises. I think this is a far superior film to both of those. And I think, I was listening to the Blank Check podcast, which is a great podcast that I'd recommend for anyone. And their whole podcast is talking about filmmakers who got successful earlier on and then were given a blank check to make whatever they want. M. Night Shyamalan's a good one. And Christopher Nolan kind of follows that path where he made Batman Begins and then he got a blank check to make The Prestige, and then he makes The Dark Knight, and then he got a chance to make Inception. But his blank check movies are so successful that they become like movies that you could make a blank, like would give him a blank check.
And so bold and so inventive. Like, no matter what you think of Interstellar, what is that movie about? That movie is about it is about relativity. And it's about how it affects our emotions and our that's another compression of time thing as well. Like you could really tell what he is focused on. But what is Inception about? We're diving into dreams. What the hell? And this is a James Bond movie. I love that he takes these concepts farther than anybody really has in film.
It is so cool that we have one filmmaker out there who people are willing to just give $200 million to make a movie and give a ton of marketing to, and who has Final Cut, and he can just make whatever the hell he wants. And he does it not by making franchise movies, not by making superhero movies, but he does it by making original movies that explore these crazy ideas. It's just, even if I don't like his movies on an individual basis, I'm glad Christopher Nolan is out there, doing work, creating crazy shit, and just using all the blank checks he's been written to create amazing stuff that often is very successful.
Yeah, sure, but I don't think that it's interesting to me that you guys talk about him as the crazy idea guy, because I think Dunkirk is the opposite of that, right? I don't think it has anything to do with ideas. It is about experience on a visceral level. It is about being in that place and not having any ideas, not understanding what's going on.
The idea,
but just like being on a beach with
narrative.
being on a beach with what was it, 100,000 dudes or whatever, and figuring out a way to shoot that and to execute it just that, the idea. You're right. The idea is not, hey, we're diving into people's dreams. We're stuck on a beach with 100,000 guys. You're right. The idea is not as crazy, but I think the execution is just as crazy as
for sure. For sure. But and I think, as Devendra says, the idea of removing idea is a crazy thing in and of itself, and just kind of creating this pure pastiche of, of just experience. It is almost dreamlike in and of itself, because it has a hard time holding together, but you are so inside the experience of that chaos that is what is powerful.
Instead of using a traditional narrative, he is using the power of film editing to connect you to a gunshot happening here, to something happening over there, and to all these characters. We don't even know their names, but we still feel something for them, and I found that kind of astounding. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's my number 5 choice. Lots to discuss, guys. But my number 5, Devendra's number 10, not on Jeff's list at all. That's Dunkirk. Let's move on. Number 4. Getting tense now, guys. Getting tense now. Devendra Hardawar, your number 4 choice of 2017.
My number 4 is Call Me by Your Name. And this was a really interesting thing for me, too, because I literally saw this movie yesterday. And it could just be one of those things of it being really fresh in my mind. But I spent a lot of time agonizing over my list. And this movie just floored me. This, I think, is the singularly most romantic thing I've seen this year. And this film is Luca Guadagnino's story about a young 17-year-old who begins a romantic relationship with the research assistant of his father. And it explores a gay relationship, I think, in a really refreshing way in a film. But also there's so much here. The backdrop of this film is the Italian countryside in the 80s, and everything is drenched in sun. And there's such a clear sense of eroticism throughout the whole movie. You will not look at apricots and certain fruits in the right, the same after watching this movie. There's just so much going on here.
Sounds like a threat.
It is certainly a threat. But it is so beautiful and so lovely. And I think the emotion of being a teenager and being infatuated with this older person who could possibly never really be into you, but maybe they can, and maybe you have this special bond, and maybe it may not last forever. And what does that mean? And how does that affect you? And being a teenager, I think in many ways this feels like a companion piece to Lady Bird, because it is all about that. It is a coming of age story in a really specific place. And also, funny enough, Timothy Chalamet is in both films. He's just had an incredible year. I think specifically with his performance in Army Hammers, they really sell this movie for me. And there's just so much going on here. I also really loved Michael Stuhlbarg, who plays Timothy Chalamet's dad, and who is, I think, the most supportive father figure I've seen in the movie when it comes to relationships.
Ever in the history of mankind.
Ever in the history. And it's probably definitely a little fantastical, I'd say. But it's also like, if, Laurie Metcalf and Lady Bird felt like mom goals in a way, I feel like Michael Stuhlbarg for me in this movie is dad goals. Like just being purely supportive of your child and their relationships, and maybe what they're going through is not conventional, but your job as a parent is to support them and give them, the structure to explore that and to grow as a person. So yeah, with all that said, this is definitely one of the best films of the year for me.
All right, that's Call Me By Your Name is Devindra's number 4. I saw this movie a few nights ago, Devindra. A lot of people were telling me, you got to see Call Me By Your Name before you make your top 10. Did not make my top 10. I have nothing against this movie. I think I understand why people enjoy it. It's kind of just not my jam. It just kind of didn't resonate with me in the way that it resonated with other people. I understood what I was trying to do. It is trying to give you tell this romantic story in a way that's usually not told on screen. It's not like a rom-com. It tries to capture the unfolding of a romantic relationship in a much more realistic fashion. Again, I appreciate what I was trying to do. The film is beautiful. Apparently, the entire film was shot with one 35mm lens. So like it's from the same perspective, and it looks amazing. But just kind of didn't connect with me on the level that I was hoping for. So for that reason, it's not my top 10. But definitely can see why a lot of people like it, and definitely can see why it speaks to a lot of people. So
let me tell you guys, like, I've seen a lot of things in normal public screenings this year. This movie, the final 10 to 15 minutes of this movie, there's a conversation that happens between Michael Stuhlbarg and his son.
Yeah.
My entire indie theater was just bawling.
Weeping. They were just weeping.
Openly bawling. And you could hear people gasping for breath. And it was intense in a way, just on a relationship level. People cried a little with Lady Bird and everything, because I think that movie has a great ending, a beautiful little poetic ending. But this movie just feels devastating in a way too. It's kind of heartbreaking, kind of beautiful. It's definitely something that's effective for me.
Let's Call Me By Your Name, and it's Devindra's number 4 movie of the year. Jeff Kanata, your number 4 film of 2017.
Well, as I said earlier, first of all, I'm really sad I didn't get a chance to see Call Me By Your Name yet. It's on the list to see very soon. Anyway, my number 4 is what? It was Devindra's number 6. It's The Phantom Thread. And I think there was a little discussion.
Phantom Thread, I believe.
Just Phantom Thread, yeah.
No. My movie was The Phantom Thread. Very different film. Phantom Thread. I think there was some discussion before we started recording of whether or not this is even considered technically a 2017 movie or a 2018 movie. But I saw it in 2017.
It'll be my number 1 of 2018, Jeff.
It is quite something. I'm such a fan of the work of all of these artists. Daniel Day-Lewis, the fact that this might be his last acting role, I find to be a crime against humanity, because he is just infinitely watchable. I mean, I just can fall into this movie by just studying him and looking at him. But he's not even the only interesting thing going on. There's so much to watch here. There's just the world of these 1950s couture fashion houses is fascinating to me. That's a topic that I've never been fascinated with before. The fact that this movie makes that fascinating. and that's merely the backdrop upon which this love story is played out. And it is an unconventional love story, to say the least. But it is a movie that I just was mesmerized by. I think that is the perfect word to describe it. It is a mesmerizing film. You are mesmerized by the performances, by the sort of grandiosity of that world and the people that inhabit it, and the kind of lifestyle that they lead, and by
the food they eat.
Yes, everything. Man. There's so much detail in the movie. And I'm mesmerized by the relationship that emerges that is so unconventional and strange and hard to dissect and unpredictable and has weird turns at the end. It is, man, what a movie. Another one of those movies that's stuck in my head and I've thought about long after I saw it.
Yeah.
How about you, Devendra? You ranked this as your, what was it, number 6, right?
Number 6, yeah. And I also saw this movie just a couple of days ago here in New York, and it gobsmacked me. Like, it is gorgeous. It's enigmatic. If you've seen that trailer or heard any bit about this movie, like, there really isn't much of a plot here. You're just kind of, you're following the life of this dressmaker. He is honestly kind of an asshole. And I was beginning to get worried throughout the movie, like, oh man, are we just watching another movie about like a genius asshole who everybody just tolerates because he's supposedly a genius, but he can treat everybody like crap? And the movie, I think, partially is that, and then it starts to subvert that in really beautiful and interesting ways. Didn't expect it to be funny. It is genuinely funny too, and very romantic and beautiful, like we were saying. There's just so much going on here. I think I love what Paul Thomas Anderson is doing now, with things like The Master and Inherent Vice, which I also loved and just rewatched after this, and also feels like this movie in a weird way feels like a perfect follow-up to a movie about a stoner 70s detective in California, because there was the same underlying thread of like, of sadness and loneliness and like hopeless relationships in a way too. And I love the way he is kind of elliptically exploring these topics now compared to, like, I like his earlier films too, but something like Magnolia, that movie is just so much. It is trying so much, and it's long, and it's really it has its heart on its sleeve in a way. And whereas I think the mature Paul Thomas Anderson, who's kind of grown into telling these stories in slightly lighter ways, and I think in slightly more oblique ways, that is far more interesting to me. So yeah, this movie, Dave, can't wait till you see it. I think you'll love it.
I think you're going to love it too, Dave. It's so funny. I had a relative over the holidays ask me if I'd seen that movie about the guy that sews things into people's dresses. And I was like, if that's what you think this movie is about, I'm so excited for you to see it.
That's a thing that happens in this movie, yes.
If that's what you think the idea of this film is, whoa, are you in for some excitement?
Yeah.
Well, that's Jeff's number 4 film of 2017. My number 4 film of 2017 is Your Name. And this is the movie Makoto Shinkai's anime film. That's part high school coming of age story, part teen romance, part body swap drama, part action,
disaster film.
Yeah, part disaster film action thriller. It is a really, here's one thing that I think this movie does really well is it captures the sense of longing that people in general can have. More than any other film I think I've seen this year, longing to be in a different place than where you are, longing to, like, if you're in the city, you want to be out in the countryside where things are simpler. If you're in the countryside, you want to be in the city where, like, more of culture and society happens. You want to be with someone who is far away and unattainable or unachievable to be with that person. This movie really captures that feeling in a really profound way through a fairly crazy plot, and that combines many different elements of sci-fi and of drama and romance. So I really love this movie and thought it was it just did a lot of different things that I haven't seen movies try to, like, balancing all these different tones and all these different plot mechanics. And the movie's beautiful as well. Just the illustration and the animation is beautiful. So
beautiful digital animation. Yeah.
During our review, I seem to remember Devindra liking this even more than you, Dave.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So
and it didn't make your list.
Yeah.
Well, it's on my honorable mentions, and as I said, I feel like depending on my mood, anything in my 10 through 20 or my 11 through 20 could easily be in my top 10. So I feel kind of bad that I didn't get to fit in here. But at the same time, like, there are things I think I want to highlight some movies that are still playing in theaters too, that people can go and experience in that way. It is funny to me that there is this movie and then there's Call Me by Your Name this year. It's getting really confusing.
It's almost like you tried Synergy and just couldn't quite make it.
We were a couple of words off. Yeah.
Well, that's my number 4 choice. It's Your Name. It's out on Blu-ray right now, and I'd recommend if you haven't had a chance to check it out. It had a theatrical release, but anime movies in theaters don't tend to do super well.
Or just wait for the American live-action remake, which is coming soon.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right. It did do extremely well. It is the most successful anime film of all time. So I should say. Yeah. It did do extremely well. Made $355 million worldwide. Yeah. Just in America, it hasn't really caught on in a way that
I do hope it's the start of a trend, though, because seeing this animation and seeing just something like this projected on a giant screen, like it's so beautiful. And I feel like we've lost that in a way. Just we don't see traditional animation very much on big screen. So yeah, want more of that.
Yeah, agreed. Your Name, it made $5 million in the U.S. It's so crazy to see that in the box office chart. Like $5 million in U.S., $355 million worldwide. The movie's Your Name. Check it out. Okay, guys, we're down to our final 3 choices. And there's a lot of
Olympic podium style. We got to the podium.
There is a lot of variety in these top 3. I'm actually a little surprised, but let's do it, guys. So Jeff, take us through your number 3.
Okay, so my number 3 is a movie that spent a lot of iterations on my list at number 1.
Wow.
I really, really, really almost put this at number 1. Number 3. I Don't Feel at Home in This World Anymore.
So this is the Netflix movie, starring Elijah Wood and Melanie Linsky, kind of a Coen Brothers homage, right?
I guess.
And what was it about this film that resonated with you so much?
I feel like this movie is 2017 to me, and it is everything I love about movies. It is. I went back and actually listened a little bit to my review of this because it came out very early in the year. I think last January or February we were talking about it. Came out very early in the year, so I wanted to refresh and think. I wanted to make sure that my memory of loving it was as strong as actually loving it. And so I went back and re-listened to what I said. And what I said was it was as if Quentin Tarantino grew a conscience. And I think that is apt. It's got the spunk and the panache of a Tarantino movie. It's got that sort of surprising violence and plotting that goes into dark places unexpectedly that I love from his work. But it also has something really beautiful to say about the world and about feeling powerless and having so much passion inside you to make things better, but that being an impotent feeling because of just how overwhelming negativity is in the world. And it feels like this movie is 2017 to me. It is the movie that sums up, I mean, just the title alone kind of says it. It sums up that feeling of wanting to make things better and not understanding why everything around you conspires to undermine that. And I love the relationships in this movie. I love where it goes. There's a speech given by pretty much the worst person in this movie that I find to be one of the most beautiful speeches of 2017's in the cinema. It's a great movie that too few people have seen or are talking about. And part of the reason that I love putting it this high on my list is I hope it inspires some people to check it out because it's on Netflix now, easy for you to watch. I Don't Feel at Home in This World Anymore. I adore this movie.
Great moment in that movie, Jeff, is when she meets this guy at a bar that's like, oh my gosh, we're into the same things. And then he just spoils something for her, like right there.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh, we can't even have this small, nice thing without a dude spoiling something. Yeah. And I realized by saying that, I might have spoiled the movie in some way for you, but, you know.
Thanks a lot, Dave.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Anyway, it did not resonate with me nearly as much as you, Jeff. I wanted to love this movie. Macon Blair, right, directed it and stars in it. I'm a big fan of his work. I wanted to love this movie, but yeah, I think it's a very competent, well-made movie. It just didn't connect with me on the way that I think it connected with you. So that's I don't feel at home in this world anymore. It's Jeff's number 3 film of 2017. Well, Devindra Hardawar, you and I again have the same movie for our number 3 choice.
Synergy!
You know, Jeff, you keep using that word. I don't think you know what it means.
This is more simpatico. Yeah.
Our number 3 choice for 2017 is Blade Runner 2049. So, Devindra, we're really high up on the list now.
Yeah.
Why was Blade Runner 2049 your number 3 choice of the year?
Because this movie is a miracle, guys. Like, this movie shouldn't exist in the way it does. Like, it is not only like a great science fiction film, but I think a worthy follow-up to the original Blade Runner. It really expands on the ideas that we explored there, and in some ways surpasses it, I'd say. And that's quite a feat. Also, this movie is just gorgeous. Like, definitely one of the best cinematic experiences I've had this year. Something that demanded to be seen on the big screen. This felt like if Dunkirk wasn't all about, you know, really fast edits and crazy action, this is more like it's giving us wonderful presentations that we just drink in for, you know, shots at last for a long, long time. So yeah, just enjoyed it overall. I think to me, this movie feels like pure cinema in a way. I think noir, for me, is always such a wonderful cinematic genre, and this movie explores it while also delving into, you know, deeper ideas around artificial intelligence and artificial life and what all of that means and the deeper meaning behind all of that, while also giving us like a beautiful broken world that is even somehow worse than the original Blade Runner. Like, the world is even more fucked than it was in that movie, which is, I don't know, kind of astounding. But I think ultimately really worked for me. Gosling, Dave Bautista, one of like probably his best performance in anything, and he's in this movie for like 5 minutes, but he is just fantastic.
In the vast cinematic...
Dude, he's been in a lot of movies. He's like 2 Guardians of the Galaxy movies, Bushwick, which is this crazy. I may talk about it later, but like he's been in a bunch of stuff, and here he
has 54 credits on IMDb. Of course, several of those credits have to do with wrestling.
Probably,
but there's also a bunch of there's a bunch of credits that don't have to do with anything. Yeah, so
you guys are not going to believe it is the greatest Dave Bautista performance in the history.
Okay, let's just be clear. Like, the way Jeff is talking about it is extremely like diminishing of the performance, but I think it actually is. It is legitimately a good performance. So
I agree, and I'm a fan of him. I'm a wrestling fan, so I'm a fan of him. I just thought it was a funny thing to say.
Yeah.
So
I mean, this movie makes Dave Bautista look good. I think that's very much an accomplishment, but also his own performance is fantastic.
In the same way that Logan was a sign to me that maybe things can go right in terms of, you know, people making original works and or bold works and being rewarded for it, Blade Runner 2049 was the opposite. I mean, this movie bombed. It made $258 million worldwide, $91 million in the United States. There's a series of tweets that Drew McWeeny made about it where he quoted this article from IndieWire, where it's like Denis Villeneuve is still trying to understand the box office failure of Blade Runner 2049. It was maybe because people were not familiar enough with the universe. That's the IndieWire tweet. And then Drew McWeeny says, I love this movie, but let me break this one down for you. It's a 3-hour Blade Runner sequel. Mystery solved, Denis. You know, and he's like, quote, I made a sequel to a box office disaster, and I was true to all the things that audiences did not connect with the first time. I also made it for a massive budget. I am mystified by the lack of commercial success.
Stick with the art, Denis, not with your box office projections.
I think, it is a huge bummer that audiences did not connect with this in a big way. But I mean, this movie was 2 hours and 40 minutes long?
Yeah, it's really long.
It's a big ask. of people to watch. It's also a ponderous movie. This is not The Last Jedi. I mean, it doesn't. There's not a ton of like huge action scenes in this movie, but it deals with the same ideas and concepts that the original Blade Runner dealt with, and it does so in a way that's gobsmackingly gorgeous. It's thought provoking, and there's a lot of amazing performances here to sink your teeth into as a viewer. So. Blade Runner 2049, I really enjoyed our review with C. Robert Cargill of this film. Would recommend you go check that out. But it's a movie, I should have mentioned, it's another movie that I watched twice in theater. So I contributed $25 or whatever to that $90 million domestic take. I think this is a movie that we'll still be talking about 20 years from now. I think it's a movie that is going to stand the test of time, even though it's not recognized in its own day for its brilliance from a box office perspective. I think,
And is there anything more Blade Runner than that?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It will follow the spirit of Blade Runner by being a complete box office failure and then still being watched, in theaters 30 years from now. So
hopefully we won't have 10 different versions of it by then.
Agreed.
So, right.
Agreed.
We'll see. Although there were rumors of like the extra long cuts too, so who knows?
Yeah. But this is just really up there in terms of an experience of the theater that I really appreciated, especially watching it at the Seattle Cinerama. Was mind-blowing,
The
just
sound design too, like it did feel similar to Dunkirk, but not as like, it's more of a slow, drawn-out thing. The score didn't do as much for me as like Vangelis's original score, but there was still like the sound design of the score was even something that was kind of fascinating. It just hits you in the gut.
Yeah. Blade Runner 2049, Devendra Hardawar, and my number 3 film of 2017. All right, getting close now. Number 2 movie.
Well, let me just say real quick though.
Yeah.
I didn't have this on my list. It is it's number 11 for me. It really is. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight the fact.
All
that
right.
I didn't
Well,
put it
Jeff,
on my
you're
list.
you're still not forgiven for not including it.
I struggled. I don't think. I mean, if you compare it to Arrival or Sicario, I don't think it holds up to those. But it is an amazing movie, and I wanted to put it on my list. There's no room. It was number 11 for me.
All right, number 2 time, Devendra Hardawar. So we had all 3 of us had different movies for number 2.
Which is good, yeah.
Devendra,
Nice.
take us through your number 2, which is the same as my number 9.
My number 2 is The Florida Project. And I've only seen this movie once. And few movies this year have stuck with me in this way. Because what this movie is, it's a movie about, kids in a motel in Florida. And at the same time, this movie is about so many bigger things. It's about, the income disparity of America. It's about kids living through poverty and kind of what they have to deal with. It's about drug abuse in a way. It's about
the
like
resilience
a lot
of kids. It's about
there's zillions of kids. Yeah.
No, it's about the resilience of kids. I was trying to say.
Resilience of kids.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
it's true.
Like how they can survive really challenging situations and still come out the other side. So
yeah. It is at the same. It is definitely one of the most heartbreaking things I've seen this year, but also one of the most hopeful things. And I know you weren't a fan of that final shot, Dave, but I think that encapsulates everything this movie is trying to say. It's won't even say what it is here. It's certainly not literal, I'd say, but when you watch that and you watch this movie, I think it is a perfect end cap to what this experience is, and kind of shows like Sean Baker with Tangerine gave us another look at like a world we don't typically see of like trans women and prostitutes in LA, and making us feel something about that world and telling us something and showing us something new. I think this movie in a way does a lot of that. And I said this during my review, but I think this is a perfect follow-up to American Honey, another film that kind of explored the underseen sides of America, and especially of people who are just struggling to get by and what kids have to do and teenagers kind of have to do sometimes. I found it all just really powerful and really, it's a very 2017 story. I think, we're dealing with a lot of things, but I think income inequality is certainly one of the biggest ones, even if, I think you could boil down to a lot of the issues we're dealing with in America to this, and, how much we prioritize, kids, or we don't prioritize kids. I don't know. So yeah, it's a really powerful film for me.
I really enjoyed it as well. That's why I put it as my number 9. I think Sean Baker is phenomenal with first-time actors. You know, there's a lot of people in this movie that haven't acted at all, and same is true of Tangerine as well.
It seems impossible with what he managed to pull off. It seems impossible.
The Florida Project's also a beautiful film. It was shot. You know, it's actually interesting. Like several movies this year on our top 10 list were shot on film, and that's kind of not super common these days. But Florida Project was shot on film. There's another movie coming up in the rest of our list that is also shot on film. So I thought it was a really fascinating, heartbreaking look into these people's lives. And I thought it was, executed really well with some very naturalistic performances by all involved. So, great film, great choice for number 2, Devindra, and it was my number 9. So, let's see what else we got. Number 2, Jeff Kanata, what is your number 2 film of 2017?
I struggled with this because I just had to look at myself honestly and say, when I look back at this year, what are the experiences in the cinema that I'm going to cherish, and how highly do I cherish it? And the honest answer is that my number 2 is The Last Jedi. And that is because it exceeded my expectations on almost every level. For all of the faults that I have brought up in our two-hour discussions on that movie, they are completely overwhelmed by the feelings that I had while watching it twice now, and I will watch it again and again. It is, I think, still the best Star Wars movie. I don't know if it's my favorite Star Wars movie, but I think it is the best Star Wars movie. It is a Star Wars movie that actually has something to say that's larger than just the Star Wars mythology or saga. It is actually speaking to the world, and it is of its time, and also a rip-roaring adventure that is, I find, thrilling and satisfying and emotional. The experience of watching The Last Jedi the 2 times that I did ranks among my favorite experiences in a cinema at all, ever. It is. I was moved. I was jumping up and down in my seat. It is everything I could hope for from a series that has meant so much to me as a human being ever since I was a very young child. It seems like a wish come true to have this franchise mean what it means, what it meant when I was a kid again. And for all those reasons, I can't help but put it this high on my list.
That's The Last Jedi. It's your choice for number 2, Jeff. And Devindra, I think this is also on your list at number 9.
Yeah,
right?
It was my number 9. Yeah, and it is. I definitely struggled in terms of where to put this on my list, or even if I should put in my top 10 at all. But when I really thought about it and thought about like what Rian Johnson actually accomplished here, he is pushing Star Wars into territory we've never seen before. With stylistic touches we've never seen before. He's like just doing so much. As a film geek, I really appreciate his nods to Kurosawa and his nods to classic filmmaking. There's a wonderful, the opening sequence of the casino sequence is like a nod to a silent film that has a great one shot. There are so many things going on here. It's a beautiful film. It's well acted, thematically fascinating. And I think in many ways, even though Star Wars fans don't realize it, it is fixing problems that have existed with the series from the beginning. Like, I think it is doing so much work while at the same time being really entertaining, really moving, and fantastic and dramatic. And I hope it sets up, this movie sets up the series to be something really new and different. And I hope the next film follows up with that.
All right. Well, that's Devindra's number 9, Jeff's number 2. It's Star Wars The Last Jedi. My number 2 movie of the year is I, Tonya. This is Craig Gillespie's movie, written by Steve Rogers, about the life of Tonya Harding. And as we discussed last week on the podcast, it's like if Fargo and Goodfellas had a baby, and the baby was about the life of Olympic figure skater Tonya Harding. I mean, it is a technically dazzling movie, extremely well acted, and it touches on themes like classicism and domestic abuse in a way that's is classicism a word, by the way? Did I say that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
Classism.
Sorry, not classicism.
Yes. Classicism is
classicism
art,
is about art. Yeah, sorry about that. And it touches on themes like hold on, let me do that again. It touches on themes like classism and domestic abuse in a way that's thought-provoking and moving. I just love this movie, and I feel like people should give it a chance. Check it out. It's not what you think it will be, and that's why I'd recommend it as my number 2 movie of the year. That's I, Tonya. Jeff, I think you're the only other one on this podcast that's seen I, Tonya, right?
Yes, I also enjoyed it. I think we're going to talk at length about that movie on the show at some point
in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I definitely don't think it compares to any of the other films on my top 10, but it is certainly a movie worth seeing and lots of fun. And based on its subject matter, far better than it ever deserved to be. I mean, you're talking about subject matter which is ostensibly, tabloid quality, but this is taken to that level of real cinematic. There's a style and sensibility that I think outstrips its subject matter, and that makes it very fun. It is a very fun movie to watch.
All right, well, that's my number 2. It's I, Tonya. And finally, gentlemen, we have reached the top of the mountain. Number 1 movie of 2017. And, guys, I was looking over our number 1 movie of 2016. We all had different movies last year, I believe. I put The Handmaiden. Jeff, I think you put Arrival. Devindra, you put Moonlight. We all had different movies. And the year before that, we all had the same movie. I think we all put Mad Max Fury Road as the number 1 movie of the year.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this
By the
year,
way, Mad Max Fury Road is also my best movie of this year and last year and next year probably.
Forever.
Yeah.
So this year, kind of a mixed bag. Jeff, why don't you walk us through your number 1 movie of 2017?
And again, I will say, as I've said over and over, this mixed around, and I had a really hard time coming up with a final numbering solution. And like Devindra has said a couple of times, this is a movie I saw very recently, and I worry that it's the fact that it's so recent in my mind elevates it more than it deserves. I don't know. But I will say I think it is the most incredible movie I've seen this year as of right this moment. So I'm going to say 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri is my number 1 film of 2017. I think this is about as perfect a script as you can execute. It is everything that happens reflects on everything else. Everything that happens is both important in the moment it happens, but also sets up something for later in the most unexpected way. The roles you think everyone fits into are absolutely shattered throughout it. It is a story of redemption and forgiveness on a very gut-wrenching, powerful level. Frances McDormand's performance is hands down the best performance by any human being in film this year that I've seen, and that's a year with Daniel Day-Lewis doing stuff. She brings such a truth and a rawness and a stripping away of any pretense. And she is just the most badass, hardcore, nothing to lose woman I've ever seen. And yet dark and heartbreaking and relatable. It is a vulnerable performance, even as it is hard and hardened. I can't even, and Sam Rockwell is amazing in this movie, and Woody Harrelson is amazing in this movie. Where it goes, it just walloped me, and it's like a prism. This script, everything reflects on everything else, and all of the things you think are just there for one reason are there for many reasons. It is a movie I can't get out of my head. I love 3 Billboards Outside of Ebbing, Missouri.
Yeah, that performance Sorry. Frances McDormand's performance in this movie is definitely like it is basically the Samuel L. Jackson quote from Pulp Fiction, right? She is striking down everything here with furious anger, and that's it. Like that is she makes this movie for me. I think that core plot of everything there works so well. And I did like the unexpected turns around that. I don't know. I'm still like working through my feelings about how this film treats, the black characters in the story, which sometimes feel like they're sidelined in a way. But I think this core story of what she's dealing with, of like sexual abuse and, how this town is basically kind of in a way fighting to hide it or hide investigating it, is really powerful. Yeah.
I don't know. Like, I basically, what I'm struggling with is I have a lot of negative things to say about this film, but I don't know if I should use this opportunity to do that because I don't want to rain on I don't want to rain on Jeff's parade. Jeff's had a great time watching this movie and he thinks it's really profound. I don't want to use this as an opportunity to say like, here's like 10 reasons why this movie's really problematic and arguably bad. But at the same time, I just don't know if I can let this pass. I'll just say, Jeff, here's what I'll say. My journey with this movie is when I left the theater, I thought, man, that was great. Love the whole movie. Frances McDormand's awesome. The ending is really thought-provoking. Love the movie. And the more I thought about it and the more I read about it, the more I'm just like, you know what? This movie really did make me feel gross. In some ways. And at the time when I was watching it, I was so impressed by the screenwriting and the monologue that these characters are giving and how skillfully some of these sequences are executed that I could kind of push those things aside when I was watching the movie. But then thinking back and reflecting on it, I'm just like, you know what? No, I can't push those things aside. Like, I can't fully embrace this movie in a way that many critics are. And that's why, unfortunately, it's not my top 10 list. But I just needed to say that. I hope you don't find it diminishes your position at all. I think it's a totally respectable choice for number one. Yeah. But it's just a movie that like bothers me more and more the more I think about it.
I would love to know why that is, but I respect you saying it. I don't take any,
Well, the conversation about this movie was really interesting because there was like the festival reaction was generally, really positive and people really liked it. And I think as more critics got to see it, some of the underlying problems of like how this movie deals with race, like the treatment of black characters in this town is an important part of the story, but in a way it feels sidelined to you. And because that redemption storyline feels unearned sometimes. Because
the redemption storyline just feels like, it pains me. Like I'm in pain thinking about it right now.
But like, you know what? Like that's the thing too. Like I don't want to sound like we're just shitting on the movie.
Yeah, that's the thing. I don't want to. Yeah,
because it's a multiple thing, right? Because I think this movie handles the idea of sexual assault and against women. I think it handles all that well. It fails in other respects. I don't know if that drags down the whole movie for me, especially when, we're judging art on multiple levels here. That's the thing. Like the conversation has gotten really, really muddy around this film.
Well, one of the things that I love most about this movie is that it is all about shades of gray. Everybody does despicable things and everybody does beautiful things. Everybody, even the people that seem so clearly defined, clearly outlined as awful people, do beautiful things. And even the people who seem so beautiful and relatable and understandable do awful things, despicable things.
Yeah,
there's no one
including
spared.
Mildred. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And I would love to have a longer, more spoilery discussion about that. But that's what's so great about this movie is nobody is spared. It is ugly, warts and all, with everyone, but yet also there are no easy scapegoats and no easy way out of any of this. It's just human pain and difficulty, and yet we all have to fucking live together and coexist, and we have to that's what's so beautiful about it. Yeah, these are ugly things, and there are people that should not be redeemed, and yet we all have to live on the same planet together. And that's kind of, I think, what the movie is saying is like there are beautiful parts of ugly people and ugly parts of beautiful people, and that's the world. and it's hard. It's hard.
Mhm.
and that's why the movie just walloped me in such a big way, man. I loved it.
All right, that's 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. It's Jeff's choice for #1 movie of the year. Let's get to our #1 choice for favorite film of the year, Devendra Hardwar. So Devendra and I both had the same #1 movie of the year.
And one movie we haven't even talked about yet. We haven't even mentioned the name of this film yet. So, yeah.
And that movie is Get Out.
Of
now,
course.
My number 7. It was my number 7, Nelson.
Jeff's number 7.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
And this is the movie that I think, like, you know, I appeared recently on Film Spotting, and I gave a shout out to I, Tonya as my favorite film of the year. It is my number 2. But as I'm thinking about making this list, I mean, Get Out is the movie that I think has made more of a cultural impact than any other movie this year.
It defines this year.
Yeah, it defines this year in a lot of ways. Like when we think back to, like, when you're looking over 10 years from now, we're looking over movies of 2017. This is, like, if you're like, show me a movie that sums up 2017, this is the movie I would show them, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is the movie people were talking about. This is a movie that reflects our times. This is the movie that, also, like, even from a business perspective, this is a Blumhouse movie made for a very little amount of money. It grossed over $200 million domestically. It's given us things in, like, it's introduced concepts into our lexicon, like the sunken place, that I think people will be using for years. I just think how well Jordan Peele conceived and executed this horror film about, you know, this guy visiting his girlfriend's family, and all the subtle and explicit forms of racism that he encounters is a great summary of the tensions that are still at play even today. You know, the way he's described it many times in interviews is that after the election of Obama, we were living in this post-racial lie, that this concept that racism was largely not a problem anymore because Obama was the president of the United States. That many people had told themselves this lie, and that he created this film as a way of illustrating, no, it's not gone away. It's still a huge problem. And when he was shooting, you know, writing and shooting the movie, he did not know that Trump would become the president of the United States.
Yeah,
you know?
It's such a prescient film in a way,
right?
Yeah.
And that Trump would do so by stoking a lot of xenophobic fears. And our fear of the other, and fear of the unknown, and fear of people of different color. And so the way this movie touches upon those things in a way that fits into kind of a conventional horror film narrative, I just think is absolutely brilliant.
I think when we talk about cultural impact, right, this amorphous idea, because as we've been talking about
cultural relevance, as it were.
Cultural relevance, yeah, all of that. As we talk about that, this is the defining movie of it. You say The Sunken Place. You make a short, like, you can make a short reference to something that's happening in Get Out. It is something that I think a lot of people can relate to, and we can all kind of find some way to tie into our lives. You know, that's it. Like, I think to me that's important. I hope this film wins Best Picture, because I think this is it. This is like the movie that defines so much of what's happening now and of our culture right now. And at the same time, it is still genuinely funny, like so much of Jordan Peele's work. It is genuinely scary. It is, on a technical level, it's a genre exercise, similar to something like Cabin in the Woods, except it's also like something with a greater societal message, which I think is fascinating as well, too. And honestly, just this idea, too, of it's not representing the sort of racism you typically see on screen and the racism we typically talk about. It is not just like the robe wearing Ku Klux Klan members. It's not just something you'd consider maybe from the South, right?
Right. It's that there are other forms of racism and microaggressions that people of color need to deal with on a regular basis. Jeff Kanata, you listed this movie as your number 7, you said, right?
Yes, indeed.
Number 7. Jeff's number 7 was Get Out as well.
I concur with so much of what you guys have said. It is an incredible movie and an incredible accomplishment, really coming from this small budget, sort of under the radar thing, and really breaking out and being a movie of our time and for our time. It is it's all of that, but also wildly entertaining.
Mhm.
It's so fun. Such a fun movie to watch. I mean,
Yeah.
it gets you in the place that you're supposed to be gotten when you go see a horror genre movie, you know?
Mhm.
Like from that very first shot, it is doing the things that kind of movie needs to do as well. So it doesn't get sidetracked by being something larger. It just sort of organically becomes something larger. And yeah, I really, really loved Get Out, and I think it is an important film and really a great film for 2017 for sure.
Also, one of those rare movies where every single performance is like greatest of all time. Like every performance is MVP in this film. Like Daniel Kaluuya, a guy I've been following for a while on British TV. He also starred in my favorite Black Mirror episode, 15 Million Merits. He is a powerhouse. Like just what he is dealing with, like
I saw him in Sicario recently. Very good in that too.
Yeah. He's dealing with the subtle implications of racism, but also once he realizes he's in a horror movie, like shit gets real, and I think he really gets into that. But also Allison Williams representing this type of like, I don't know, like a certain type of racism too. That I think is really fascinating. Catherine Keener is terrifying. Bradley Whitford is hilarious. Caleb Landry Jones in like I think a defining role of his creepiness. You know, Stephen Root, a guy who I typically, you know, we remember him as Milton from Office Space, but he's also played a lot of like I think well-to-do characters. There's a certain nobleness to him that I think shows like how even somebody like him, who you may side with as you're watching the film, and turns out like maybe they could have problems too. Lakeith Stanfield, who we opened the film with him. He is one of my favorite actors right now, especially after Short Term 12. He is just terrifying. Like he is at one point is playing basically the role of somebody from like a Twilight Zone episode or Invasion of the Body Snatchers or something like that. Like perfect, like feels almost like cult sci-fi or something what he's doing in this movie. There's just so much going on here. I find it endlessly rewatchable on a technical level. It's incredibly well made. Anything else, guys?
Yeah, a few other things. First of all, I listened to the commentary of this film, and I'd strongly recommend it. It shows you how much thought went into this film, like things that you absorb on a subconscious level. Jordan Peele was putting a lot of thought into. There's that scene when you first see Georgina, you know, the maid of the house, and you enter this house and she's like waiting there smiling for you. And he was saying how like that scene was inspired by The Shining, you know, with Danny turning the corner and seeing the two sisters, you know, like there's just something very terrifying about entering a room and then someone's waiting there for you. You know what I mean? Like this, it's very scary. And so many details like that throughout the commentary, like the helmet that the guy wore in the first scene, you know, like all that stuff. A lot of thought was put into it, and it just really, even for something that's like relatively small scale, you know, this movie was only a few $1 million to shoot, you really get an appreciation of how symbolism and color and mise en scène, all these things combine together to create this movie in a way that like I didn't even appreciate without watching the commentary. So,
how the sunken place is represented, I think, is astounding. I think a lesser director would, there are ways to do that. I think in a simpler way, maybe, but the idea of falling into an infinite blackness while seeing your life, happening in front of you. I don't know, like that's something I cannot get out of my head, and it's a visual description. Like it feels like something you'd see in a painting that you would have to like, you'd spend a lot of time deconstructing or something. But yeah, it feels like something fresh and unusual for a film.
This is extremely poorly thought out, what I'm about to say. And maybe I'll edit it out because it's both poorly thought out and probably extremely unfair. But I almost feel like Get Out is the anti Three Billboards from Ebbing, Missouri. Like where
it is really interesting.
Where Three Billboards from Ebbing, Missouri posits that like, oh yeah, like police brutality is like a few bad apples, and we can just like just you just need to read a letter and they'll be fine. This movie is like, no, racism is not only surface level superficial acts. It's also like all these subconscious decisions that people make on a day-to-day basis, and that it's extremely intractable.
The big difference is this movie is focusing on something that Three Billboards didn't, but also Three Billboards has other things going on. That's the thing. But it is really interesting. We have them both.
Also, the anti-heroine of Three Billboards is a white woman, and that is like basically the villain of Get Out. You know,
right.
And so, anyway, Jeff, you're appalled. You're appalled by what I'm saying. But
put on the boxing gloves.
I think if that's the message you got from Three Billboards, I wonder what movie you watched. But it's not. I mean, I don't think we're supposed to think that he magically became not a racist by reading a letter. And also there's no point in which that movie posits that it's just a few bad apples. It is absolutely about systemic problems. Absolutely. That's what I mean. It is.
I simply disagree. I just don't agree that empirically with your assessment of the film. But okay,
what's happening,
you know what?
though? By the way,
there's not a single person in that entire police precinct that is a good cop in that movie in Three Billboards.
What are you talking about? The Woody Harrelson? Okay,
no way. Why do you think he's the guy named on the billboard?
We really need to just have a separate conversation.
We need to talk about that movie, but I do want to say, like, I think the discussion around Three Billboards ended up really focused on what it lacked and what it didn't say directly, whereas Get Out explicitly says, like, by the way, this racism is a problem, and Three Billboards doesn't say it explicitly, but it does, like, the way that police force doesn't work well. We're talking about the redemption narrative. I don't think that's a happy ending. I don't think we're ending in a place where both characters are redeemed in a way, and I think that's what it is. If you look at the end of that movie, it's like, oh well, you know, the bows, we have a neatly wrapped bow here, and everything's gonna be happy from now on. I don't think that's the way it is.
Well, I think let's just we'll need to have a separate tussle about this, because I disagree with everything you guys are saying, but it's cool. Let me finish saying what I was gonna say about Get Out, which is. And sorry to introduce that unfair, poorly thought out.
You just like threw a grenade.
Just sorry for like tossing a bomb into the conversation without.
My movie is the anti your movie.
Yeah, I mean, on some, you know, we can talk about the finer points, but on some level, I really do.
I think we have to talk about that movie.
Yeah, we do. We will have to talk about it. Okay,
that's an insane, bizarre thing to say.
I don't agree.
It also implies some sort of righteousness to one of the movies, and some sort of disgusting I don't know. It's really I think it's a really bizarre, and you said unfair thing to say.
I acknowledge that I was being unfair, Jeff. I apologize for trying to ruin your mojo. I guess I have all this like pent up aggression against Three Billboards.
This is because you weren't here. You weren't here.
Yeah.
When this was happening, and also it does feel like a lot of the commentary around Three Billboards, there's a lot of pent up aggression against that movie too. Yeah. So now,
all right. So and it's not okay. Well, we're done. None of this is going to be in the podcast. So
we're good.
So
let me reiterate the fact that I liked Get Out and put it.
I don't think that was ever in question. So other thing I wanted to say about Get Out is you mentioned Stephen Root's character, and I do think that character is really interesting. I saw a Twitter storm about that character recently that I didn't have a chance to. I don't know who exactly said this, but apologies to whoever said this. But something about like how that character, without going into too many plot details, like wants the black experience without actually having gone through it, or wants to convey the black experience without actually having gone through it. And I thought that's just kind of a really fascinating side tangent to the broader horrifying story that the movie's trying to tell. So I think there's many layers to this film, and some of them were pointed out during our review that we had of this movie when we podcast about it many months ago. But it's a movie that definitely still stays in my mind, and that has created a kind of shorthand to talk about a lot of racism that's going on in our society today. So Get Out. our number one movie of 2017, and a movie that I think is really a compelling film that if you haven't seen yet, you should go see. Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. And that brings us to the end of our top 10 films of 2017. Now, before we wrap up, there are a couple of things we want to mention. First of all, honorable mentions, movies that barely didn't make the top 10 of 2017. Devindra, you have a whole list here. Why don't you just rattle them off for us?
Hey, Dave, before we do that, can we just real quick, can we kind of move through this quick? We're almost at 3 hours, and I have some obligations. So if
no problem, no problem.
Okay.
I'll just go through real quick. So yeah, my my honorable mentions. These are all pretty much my 11 through 20s, and give any given day could be in my top 10. Personal Shopper, Mudbound, Shape of Water, Your Name, A Ghost Story, War for the Planet of the Apes, Baby Driver, Okja, Columbus, which is on Hulu right now. Everybody just go watch Columbus. Mother, and The Lost City of Z. This is actually 11 choices, but whatever. Too many good movies.
Jeff, anything that barely didn't make your list? I know Blade Runner was on there, right?
Yeah. I would also add Baby Driver. Free Fire. I actually was thinking about adding Free Fire.
Solid movie.
The big one for me that I really wish I had had more room for was Last Flag Flying. That's a movie that really
Richard Linklater's new movie.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's really lovely. And also Split, just like the experience of seeing Split.
Yeah,
there's no way it makes my top 10, but like I kind of just wanted to mention it again because what an experience! I
forgot that was this year too, but yeah, that was tremendous.
And Icarus, the documentary Icarus, I think is a honorable mention. Dave, you talked about not having enough documentaries. I didn't see a ton of documentaries this year either, but Icarus certainly was a powerful one. I don't think it's, the best executed documentary I've ever seen. Certainly that goes more to Vietnam, which is definitely a movie and belongs in the movie list. But no, Icarus I thought was really one of those ones that has informed my life in a very profound way this year, and one I highly recommend. And also, lastly, I will say Valerian. You know what? It's not going to make it's not the best movie I saw, but man, did it swing for the fences, and man, are there sequences in that movie that are just absolutely balls to the wall awesome. Yep. And I know a lot of people probably are listing it as one of their worst movies of the year. Not me. I loved watching Valerian, and
I would argue the first 15 minutes of Valerian is one of the best movies of the year.
Yes.
It's an incredible. It's a movie that is problematic and has all kinds of rough edges, and it's not great. I mean, I think just purely on a casting level, it's got issues, but man, there are sequences that will never leave my imagination. It's wild.
Okay, I'll just list a couple of things that you haven't mentioned. First of all, I know you said Shape of Water. I'm surprised Shape of Water didn't end up on any of our lists. It's
in my honorable mentions. But
it was very good. It was very good. It just like there's other movies that I think we all liked a little bit better. Coco, I would say, is great. As I mentioned, Molly's Game barely didn't make my top 10. Baby Driver had the best editing in films this year, in my opinion. And put Spider-Man Homecoming on there as a movie that I really enjoyed. Oh, wow. A Ghost Story really conveyed the passage of time in ways that I haven't seen before on film. War for the Planet of the Apes did some things really well. And Wind River. Wind River. Movie.
Yes.
I don't think we've mentioned
I just watched that. It's fantastic.
I did too.
Yeah.
It's good. It's an odd. We should talk about that at some point. But for me, I found it to be kind of weird that it's like this mystery, and then it's like, oh, here's the solution to the mystery, guys. We'll just take a second. We're just going to show you that. but yeah, definitely a powerful, interesting movie.
Yeah. So those were my honorable mentions. All right, we're running super long, so let's do this. Something that they do on the Film Spotting SVU podcast that I really appreciate is they list their favorite movie of 2018 that they think is going to be their favorite movie of 2018, right? So do we have a guess for what? So actually, we have two movies, right? Like most anticipated film of 2018, like a movie you're most looking forward to, and what you think will be your favorite film of 2018. So most anticipated film of 2018, best film of 2018. As we look forward, most anticipated film, Devendra Hardawar.
That would be Black Panther. I mean, are you kidding me? Yeah, that movie looks insane. That cast is awesome. And after Creed, I will watch anything Ryan Coogler does.
How about you, Jeff Kanata?
Well, since Devendra took Black Panther, I'm definitely very excited for that movie. But it's Avengers: Infinity War for me. It's the culmination of like everything I've ever believed in my life. So I'm really looking forward to seeing it. I hope it is everything and a bag of chips.
And I'm really looking forward to Mission Impossible 6, to be honest. This is the first time that a director has returned to the franchise, right?
McQuarrie
directed 2 films. And I love how they keep one-upping themselves film after film, and I just feel like there's going to be some stuff in that movie. That...
What is next? He has to go to space, after a point. Yeah.
So we'll see, but I'm really psyched about that. Okay, what do you think is going to, as we're recording this a year from today, what do you think will be your number 1 film of 2018 so we can see how wrong we were? Devendra Hardawar, your number 1 film of 2018.
A Wrinkle in Time, because I completely trust in Ava DuVernay.
And yeah, you're psyched by the trailer of that movie?
Yeah.
All right.
The casting, everything.
For me, it's Annihilation, the Alex Garland movie. He obviously did an amazing job with Ex Machina, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he does next, especially with Natalie Portman starring in it. Jeff Kanata, how about you?
I have no idea. I think I'm definitely at a disadvantage in this category, not watching trailers because I have no clue of the quality of stuff coming up. But a couple of movies definitely feel like they might be contenders, but I'll most likely be wrong. Isle of Dogs, the new Wes Anderson. I love Wes Anderson. I love The Fantastic Mr. Fox. So what could go wrong? Isle of Dogs. And The Irishman, which is the next Martin Scorsese, Robert De Niro joint that is, I think, exclusive to Netflix, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. All right. Well, let's check back in a year, guys, and I'll use your choices to shame you. So I think that's going to wrap us up for this episode. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for listening to us for yet another year. I think this is the 10th time Devendra and I have done this together. Jeff, it's probably like our 5th time doing it together or something like that. Many years that we've been recording /filmcast episodes and doing top 10s, and we appreciate you sticking with us for all that time. So lots to look forward to in 2018. Not quite as much, it seems, to look forward to as there was to look forward to in 2017. But I still think it'll be a good year for movies. So find more episodes of this podcast at /filmcast.com. Email us at /filmcast@gmail.com. Our theme song comes from AdamWarrock.com. Our spoiler bumper comes from Kyle Hillinger. And our /filmcourt bumper comes from Simon M. Harris. In the meantime, stay tuned to hear what we'll be doing next week. But Jeff Kanata, where can we find more of your work on the internet this week?
Well, why not follow me on Twitter? I'm at Jeff Kanata, which is spelled with 2 N's and 1 T. A bunch of shows that I do. If you want to hear me give my top video games of the year, we recorded my show DLC, which you can find at 5by5.tv/DLC. We did an episode this last week with our top games of the year, and we're talking this week about our predictions for 2018, which is always a lot of fun because we listen back to the predictions that we made last year, and we listen to how wrong we were. So you can find that at 5by5.tv/DLC.
How about you, Devendra?
Oh, you can find me on Twitter at Devendra, and I write about tech at Engadget.com. I'll be out next week for CES, so follow that madness. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Devendra. Be well. Be safe.
I will try to stay healthy and just try to focus on the cool stuff.
Find all my stuff at davechen.net. Follow me at Dave Chensky. That's Dave Chen SKY on Twitter. And next week, Jeff Kanata and I will be joined by my fiance, most likely, to talk about I, Tonya.
Nice.
So should be a good time.
And probably some Last Jedi.
Yeah, I think that's actually right. So thanks for listening to the official podcast of /film.com. We'll see you later.